Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is story about what if Naruto was really a girl and was being sheltered by the Hokage in a forest inside of the village. Part 1. Before I start, please do support for more amazing content and comments for part 2. Do consider to subscribe my channel and share my video to your friends and check out the description as well. Let's start the video. The girl stared out to the lights of the village not too far from her home. She just stared more and more before eating her rice ball the Hokage had offered her. She along with the Hokage stared out into the village from the top of the mountain. They could see the village, but they could not see the home, for it was hidden in trees. The house behind them only had one light on, and it was from the lamp in the kitchen room. The girl and the Hokage sat on the wooden patio that led to the house. The little girl looked up and asked as her long blonde hair moved around, "Gigi, can I go into the village tomorrow?" The Hokage stopped eating and stared at her. She was about 7 years old, almost 8, long golden blonde hair that reached her far backside, pieces of hair on each side of her face, 2 red clips to keep her bangs from falling in front of her face. She looked so much like her mother. The only thing different was that she had blonde hair, and on the top of her hair was some spiky pieces of hair she got from her father. She wore a little white summer dress and brown sandals. She was tan peach color, and she had 3 whisker marks on each side of her face. But the thing that caught your eyes the most was her own eyes. They were a deep sky blue, a color that put even the sky and the ocean to shame. If he didn't know any better, he would have thought the little girl in front of him was an angel. The Hokage sighed before patting the girl on the head, saying, "No, you still need to work on that hinge, remember. I don't want anyone to know you're a girl. It can cause trouble." He watched the little girl pout and say, "But Gigi, I just don't understand why I have to pretend to be a boy. I like being myself." The old Hokage chuckled before patting the girl on the head again, saying, "I know you do, but the village can't learn our secret. I don't want you to get hurt, Naruto-chan. If the councils find out who you really are and who your parents are, they'll be forcing me to have you wedded to one of their clan's children in the future, and as your Gigi, I will not let that happen." Naruto made a face at the thought of being married to a boy. She giggled as she saw the Hokage go protective grandfather mode. She waited for a moment and then said, "Gigi, I was thinking when I do learn the henge, can I explore outside of the village? I mean, I do want to see Konoha and all, but I also want to travel, go to different places, see different people, learn different things, and make friends all over. Please." The Hokage looked down, his old eyes softened for a moment before saying, "Maybe one day you might. Now let's get back to the food before they get cold. I got them from a small ramen shop in town. A really nice guy owns the place there and his daughter works there. She's a bit older than you." Naruto smiled brightly and nodded as she took her chopsticks and ate the ramen that was next to her. The Hokage laughed as he saw the girl's face brighten more at the taste of her first time eating ramen. He watched her eat it fast. She was done in a heartbeat. She then asked for more. The Hokage chuckled uneasy as he thought, looks like she has gotten the love for ramen from her mother too. If those two were alive, I bet Minato would have been broke by now. His face grew grim as he thought of those two. Oh, how he missed them both and how much trouble and happiness they both brought to the village. He snapped out of his thoughts when he felt a hand on his arm. He looked down to see the small hand holding onto his robes hard. He stared up and looked at the sad-eyed girl that looked so much like Kushina and Minato. The prefect mix of them both. He smiled softly before patting her head once more. In return, she smiled brightly before saying, "Gigi, you better get back home. You have paperwork in the morning." The old Hokage sighed and grumbled about her being right and the evilness of those papers that would be on his desk when he got there. Naruto watched the Hokage get up and kiss her forehead as he said, "Goodbye, my little one. Have a good night's sleep. Snake will be here tomorrow morning to watch over you, and please don't give her too much trouble." Naruto giggled and said, "Funny, I thought for sure she was going to stop babysitting me after what I did last time." The old man chuckled before saying no. She found it funny after she got done beating the living daylights out of some poor idiots that laughed at her. "I still don't get how you did that. I mean, you were able to fool her into it all, and yet she didn't even notice that you were able to dye her hair from purple to bright pink when she fell asleep." The girl chuckled before hearing, "Now be good and go to bed soon." She stared at the Hokage and nodded. He sighed softly before walking back to the village through the woods. Before he was out of sight, he turned back and waved goodbye to the girl, who waved also. Once he was gone, the girl sighed before looking up to the stars and the moon. She smiled softly and closed her eyes. Her head snapped up to the forest. She stared for a moment before getting up and walking. Something in her mind was telling her that something was not right in her woods. She kept walking until she started to go faster and faster. Meanwhile, the figure kept running. His blade dripped with blood. His eyes were blood red too. He looked back knowing no one was following him, but he needed to get far away from the village. He gave a sad sigh. It wasn't supposed to end like this. His brother wasn't supposed to see him like that. But now it didn't matter. He was a murderer in his brother's eyes. He looked down to his side and saw blood. Her curse to himself, that bastard got a good hit on him before Sasuke had opened that door. He knew poison was inside his blood and he knew he didn't have much time. He kept running in the woods, knowing he had a few more hours before the Hokage would send out some ambush. He jumped near a tree and took some breaths. He needed to rest and try to get the poison out. He then looked to the sky and saw the stars, his eyes stayed on them, and he smiled softly. He slowly looked around, he was deep in the woods of Konoha and needed to rest. As he placed his hand over the wound he felt it sting, he clutched his teeth, his vision was fading, his knees were shaking, and his back hit the tree he was near, he felt his legs give out as he sank to the bottom, the poison was taking its full effect in one final blow. His face turned grim as he closed his eyes and stared back to the stars, he thought to himself Sasuke, I guess you'll never learn the truth would you I'm sorry little brother he looked back down to the ground before his ears caught something, it sounded like small rushing footsteps before they came to a halt right near him. He snapped his head up as his eyes started to close, all he saw was a blurred person, he could see blonde hair and 2 red clips, for a moment he saw blue eyes wide with fear, the person got closer slowly, and his eyes stared, he kept staring before he saw something, the person looked just like her. Hey Kushina-sensei. He thought before all thoughts and his vision stopped. The sun started to rise as it hit onto the trees and the animals started to wake, the birds whistled and some started to fly, the trees swayed softly as a breeze came in. Blonde hair swayed along with the breeze and her breathing was soft, she looked back to the open door to her house and sighed as she saw the black-haired man asleep. She sat on the patio edge and swung her small legs. As she stared at the blowing trees, she thought I wonder who he is. I hope he's okay. Thank goodness Snake taught me how to get poison out or otherwise he would have died from that I better tell Gigi that I found this guy when he comes by for lunch. Naruto smiled before watching some leaves flew off from the trees, she saw them dance in the wind before the breeze was sent her way. She smelled the air of ending summer and coming fall, her birthday was coming. She then watched as a leaf fell onto her lap, she stared at it before smiling. Naruto picked it up and placed it on her lips with her right hand, she waited until she whistled. And think of the leaf whistle song from Pokemon. The rise of Darkrai. Meanwhile, I am dead. I wonder strange, I feel as if the pain has stopped. Itachi thought, all around him it was dark and empty, his mind wandered before hearing something, it was soft and small, but he heard it. The darkness started to fade and light surrounded his mind. The music was still playing before he thought that song I heard it before but where? The light grew brighter and brighter until he could hear the song clear, he felt strange as if he was remembering something from a long time ago. He opened his eyes and found himself staring at a ceiling, and the sound of whistling was all he heard. No animal sounds and no breeze of the wind. He thought to himself I'm not dead. Where am I? Who saved me? He looked around and saw the sun shining outside the door as the whistling kept going. He recognized the sound leaf whistle. He stared to the door before noticing something, someone was sitting outside, playing the song. He slowly rose as he heard the song play more, he held onto his wound that was covered with a few bandages with medicine on it. As he walked to the person he looked around her, the breeze had stopped and the world was quiet, the animals watched from the forest, and the birds stopped their singing to hear the song, it was like the world stopped to hear it. Once the song was nearing the end, he walked closer, his eyes saw it was a little girl, she had semi-long blonde hair, she wore what looked like a white summer dress, and she had tan skin. Itachi leaned on the doorway and stared more. Then in a moment the song was done and the little girl sighed as she removed the leaf from her lips, she held the leaf up before letting it go, at that moment the wind blew again taking the leaf with it. The animals returned to what they were doing and the birds started to sing again. He blinked before his foot shuffled for a moment, the sound caught her attention fast, she got up and turned around. Itachi's eyes widened as he stared at the girl. No words left their mouths, nothing was said, no sound came from them. Itachi's mind raced with questions. Kushina-sensei no it's not her, Kushina-sensei had red hair not blonde so who is this girl? Why does she look like Kushina-sensei? He snapped out of his mind when he heard oh you're awake how do you feel sir? Are you still hurting? Itachi only watched the girl ask that, he still held onto his sides before saying with no emotion on his face, you saved me. He watched Naruto nod and say yup, I found you last night hurt and I noticed you were in pain, I looked at your wound and found out you were poisoned, my friend Snake showed me how to take poison out a long time ago, so I did, I also dressed your wounds. He saw Naruto smile before asking, what is your name sir? He watched for a moment before saying Itachi Uchiha. He watched the girl blink as if she tried to remember where she heard that name. She pondered for a moment before saying as she bonked her fist in her hand oh I remember now, Gigi said you're one of his most favorite and loyalist Anbus. Itachi raised an eyebrow before asking Gigi. The girl nodded and said yeah, Gigi trusts you the most out of all of them, other than Snake. Itachi waited until he asked what's your name little one and who is your Gigi? Naruto smiled and said as she tilted her head Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze is my name and my Gigi is the third Hokage. Itachi's eyes widened as he heard the name, once again his mind raced with question it can't be the Hokage told me she died along with Kushina and Minato, how can she be alive? It was then he noticed the whisker marks, his eyes widened more as he thought Minato you used your own daughter. He then asked wanting to make sure his question was correct. Who are your parents Naruto? He saw the girl stare at him before she said Gigi told me that mama and papa names were Kushina Uzumaki and Minato Namikaze. Gigi said that they were in love. Itachi clutched his hand for a second and his eyes narrowed. He cursed in his mind, she's alive, the Hokage lied to me. He told me she died with Kushina and Minato, not only that, but she has to be the baby Minato used to seal Kyuubi. Shit, why didn't I realize that the baby the third had was their child? Of course, Minato would never burden another family's child with such a cruise. But still, why didn't he tell me? He suddenly saw Naruto say Gigi and Snake doesn't want me to tell anyone who I really am and who my parents are, but I think I can trust you. He looked down to the girl as she walked to the doorway where he was leaning on. She then said as she looked in his eyes, even though your eyes are red, I can tell you're a good person. Itachi blinked. His eyes were red. She smiled and said, some might think your eyes are demon eyes, but I can see past it. You have a good soul, Itachi-kun, and I know I can trust you, but you seem sad about something. Itachi's eyes widened for a moment before he looked down, still holding his wound. Naruto grew silent before saying, let's get inside. I'll make us something to eat. Snake won't be here until 7 and it's 5. Itachi nodded slowly and Naruto smiled brightly. Itachi found the girl different. Not once did she call him Itachi-san or Uchiha-sama. She would call him the same thing her mother would call him, Itachi-kun. He would ask 1 or 2 questions to the little girl and she would smile and tell him the answer, like why was she in the woods if Snake was a Anbu member and why can't she go into the village. Even though he respected the Hokage's wishes and understood his fears of not wanting the girl to either be hated by the villagers or be pressured into marriage by the other clans, he couldn't help but feel angry and betrayed by the Hokage for keeping his sensei's daughter a secret from him. Why wasn't he told? He could have kept the secret. Did the Hokage not trust him? Itachi then noticed something about the girl. Her white dress was stained with blood. He was about to ask if she was hurt before remembering she cared for his wounds. He still asked, just wanting to make sure, what happened to your dress. Naruto stopped before looking down. She was surprised too for a moment. She waited until she remembered, oh, when I found you I was able to stop the poison, but I needed to carry you back here so I can dress your wounds. Itachi-kun. Itachi nodded softly. That was until Naruto rose as she asked, do you hear that? Itachi waited. He could hear something. They waited until it grew closer, footsteps, small ones, rushing fast to the house. Itachi reached for his sword next to his side, ready to attack whatever came through those doors. He watched Naruto suddenly say Shinku. Suddenly, a small animal jumped into the house. It rushed to Naruto and made yelping sounds. The animal was a small fox. It had red crimson fur and yellow eyes. Naruto titled her head before kneeling down to the fox. It kept yelping and barking for a moment. It stopped and rushed back out. Itachi raised an eyebrow before asking what was that about. Naruto stared out to the door before saying, he said Snake is coming. She looked back to Itachi, who stiffened. As he was going to say something, Naruto ran out the house in a flash. He was about to stop her but heard from a female voice, Nari-chan, your dress. Why are you covered in blood? He then heard Snake-san, help, I found a baby deer near death this morning. I need you to go to the stores in Konoha and get some bandages. The wound is big and I'm trying my hardest to keep it from dying. Please hurry. He could hear the snake Anbu taking a few steps back before he heard her say, okay, I'll be right back, keep that thing alive until then. And with that he could hear the Anbu run back to Konoha. Once she was gone he heard a soft sigh and he poked his head out of the doorway. He saw Naruto turn back and smile as she said, okay, she's gone for now, Itachi-kun. But let's pack some things for you. He watched Naruto rush back to the house. He saw Naruto run into a hallway and go down it. She came back a few minutes later and she held a red backpack in her hands. She placed it on the floor, saying, okay, you're going to need some bandages in case you get hurt, some food, what else? Itachi then stopped the girl and asked, why are you helping me? Naruto stopped and stared. Silence went by for a moment before she said with her eyes staring deeply at him, you did something bad, didn't you? I know it. But I also know it's not your fault, Itachi-kun. You seemed to have frozen when I said Snake was coming. You're not bad, Itachi-kun, and whatever you did I don't care. Now let's hurry before Snake or Gigi come and catch you both. Said a voice. Naruto wept and turned around. Itachi looked back and his eyes widened slowly. Standing there was Snake with her arms crossed and the Hokage at the doorway. They saw the Hokage sigh and take a few steps into the room as he said, Naruto-chan, I never thought you'll do anything like this. Naruto bit her lip and stood in front of Itachi, her arms out to protect him. She then said, Gigi, stop please, Itachi-kun isn't evil. I know it, please just listen to what he has to say. They watched the Hokage smile softly and say, it's okay Naruto-chan, I know he's innocent. The first had a strange feeling something horrible would happen, so before I left to come see you, I had Snake watch over Itachi last night. After I left she told me what happened and that Itachi was in the woods and she said you found him. At first I wasn't sure if it was alright for him to be here, but she told me she saw the real culprit. Snake other than Itachi would never lie to me, Naruto-chan. Naruto put her arms down for a moment before titling her head. Itachi seemed confused too. The Hokage chuckles softly before saying to Itachi, "But I never thought you'd lie to protect someone you hardly know. I'm surprised, Naruto-chan." Naruto looked to the ground before saying oh. The Hokage smiled before patting the blonde on the head, saying it's okay, you were just doing something you thought was right. Naruto stared up to her Jiji and smiled softly. The Hokage looked up and said, "Itachi, we have much to talk about." Itachi stared and nodded to him. Later, "I'm sorry I never told you about Naruto-chan, it's just I didn't want the council members to force her into things she doesn't want. Some might think that all because she is a girl, she'll fall head over heels for a boy, or that they could force her into marriage. After all, Kushina and Minato always knew what to invest in and what to buy when shops were going for sale. When Naruto-chan turns 18, she will own 7 of the best restaurants in town, half of the upper Konoha's homes, and almost more than 72% in the lower part of town, and more than 35 shops in the marketplace," the Hokage said as he drank the tea Naruto had given him. Naruto happily stared from her Jiji to Itachi before heading back to the kitchen to help Snake out with some of the food she was making. Itachi stared and tried his hardest not to glare at the Hokage for never telling him his teacher's daughter was alive and was the container of the Kyuubi. He had loved Kushina as if she was an older sister to him, he liked the way she smiled and warmly talked to him as if he was human and not the prefect Uchiha he had gotten when he was home. She, Minato, Jiraiya, Tsunade, and the old Hokage were the only ones that ever spoke to him like he was normal, them, and now Naruto-chan. He snapped out of his thoughts as he realized what the Hokage had said. Yes, almost all of the council members would be all over her trying to get her to marry into their clan, even his clan would have, if they were alive and knew about her. He knew that if anyone in Konoha knew of who she was, she would be in great danger. Itachi sighed before looking down thinking. He stopped when he saw a rice bowl being held in front of his face. He looked up and saw Naruto in front of him holding it. She smiled as he nodded and took it. As they sat around, Itachi stared at Snake before asking how did she know about Naruto-chan. Everyone stopped and the old Hokage chuckled softly saying now that is something worth telling. Snake was returning from a mission when she stumbled upon this house, curiosity took hold of her and she checked it out. Naruto-chan had saw her coming and put traps all around the house. I really don't know what happened, but when I came by, Snake was in a net covered in honey and feathers, part of her hair was smoking, and Naruto-chan was poking her with a stick. After we got her down she demanded to know what was going on, and having no choice but to tell the truth, I had done so. I have Snake come by for me when I cannot. She drops food off or helps watch over her. Snake cursed and glared at the Hokage from under her mask. Naruto giggled at her old memory, and Itachi smirked softly at this. His mind showed a picture of the Snake Anbu in a net, looking like a chicken, being poked by the little blonde girl. The Hokage sighed before saying now what will we do? Your brother had woken this morning and was in a terrible shock, what happened to him? Itachi cringed softly before looking down. Naruto was confused before Itachi told of what happened that night. At the end of the story he told what he had done to Sasuke, so his little brother would never have to go after the real murder, so his brother would be safe and would never know the truth behind it. Naruto's eyes were wide and her body shook softly, as if just by imagining what happened it must have been horrible. But she couldn't help but feel angry, he had lied to his brother, so he could not learn the truth. If what she knew mostly about people was true, then the lies that weren't meant to be good can sometimes hurt more even if it never meant to. She knew this Sasuke kid was going to go down a wrong path of revenge and anger. She snapped out of it and heard Snake say, what are you going to do now, Itachi? It's not like you can go back home, and I don't know if it's going to be safe here. The Hokage spoke out actually I have a mission for Itachi. Everyone stopped and stared to the old Hokage in the room, who took a puff of his pipe. Itachi, I had been given information on some very dangerous people. People who are after the sacrificed ones as he said that he glanced sideways to Naruto who didn't notice it. Itachi and Snake stiffened at this alone when they saw the glance. They knew what he meant by that. Naruto tilted her head not understanding the word sacrificed. The Hokage spoke again I want you to get as much information on the members of this organization named Akatsuki and who's behind it by any means. Naruto kept watching before saying when remembering what the words dangerous people meant but, Jiji. Itachi-kun can't be with those people. They might hurt him. The Hokage stared over to the little girl whose eyes were worried. The Hokage sighed before hearing I have a better idea, Hokage-sama. Everyone stopped and looked to Itachi who said this, why don't I take Naruto-chan with me and train her? By the time she returns I have no doubt she'll be strong enough and well skilled to protect herself, even before she's an official ninja. I'll try to get as much information on this Akatsuki as I can, so I can help her in case she has to fight them. I do think this is right Hokage-sama, I was trained by Kushina-sensei herself, and I'm the only one she had trained in her life. I know almost all of her mother's justice and those I don't know is in a scroll she left with me. Snake stared from the Hokage to Itachi. She did sort of like that idea. The little girl was already showing signs of being a good ninja and being trained by the best Anbu they have, and considering the fact to her parents where she would be great. If the Hokage allowed it, the little girl would be a force to be reckoned with before she's even 9. The Hokage was about to say something, but Itachi said, she'll be a moving target if we catch winds of anyone who wants to hurt her or after her we'll run out of there fast. And if we can't I'll kill them before they land one hand on my sensei's daughter. Naruto seemed surprised but stared at Ujiji, who was starting to think about it but heard the words, and by the time we return, she'll be able to fight off the council members if she wanted to, she won't have to hide who she is Hokage-sama, and you can torment the council about this. Naruto's eyes widened at that thought, and the Hokage smirked at the idea. If that happened, then the council couldn't pressure Naruto in marriage or other stuff. She'd be able to fight and maybe be as strong and powerful like Tsunade. He looked at the little girl who seemed eager and hopeful for the answer. The Hokage smiled softly and said after a long time thinking since you put it that way Itachi. I think that's a wise idea. Naruto's face started to beam, Itachi nodded, and Snake smiled under her mask. The Hokage then said, but by the time Naruto-chan is 10 years old, she must return to the village, so she will have 2 years of academy training. Also she is not allowed to go and do things over her head. And she cannot, and I mean cannot have too much sugar, she turns insane when she does. Naruto glared and pouted out I do not Jiji. The Hokage laughed before the others did too. Later that day, night came upon the house. The world outside was dark and peaceful. Itachi looked over to his side in the room and saw a bag sitting, waiting to be picked up. They had decided that tomorrow morning they were leaving and in 4 days the Hokage is going to tell Konoha and the council of Naruto-chan. Oh how the Hokage was going to have much fun tormenting the asses who demanded the death of Naruto. One bag belonged to him and the other bag was Naruto's. Inside their bags were scrolls, medical kits, weapons, and much more things. Naruto was sleeping and had put everything she didn't need away in a box so the Hokage could come and take care of it after they left. Itachi looked to the hallway and saw the door open. Inside the room was the sleeping blonde curled up in a ball holding onto a toy toad. He chuckled for a moment before looking out to the open door now. Tomorrow was the day their adventure began, and he swore this to himself Kushina-sensei, Minato-sen I swear to you both I will care for her as if she was my own, I'll train her to be the best she can be just like you trained me Kushina-sensei. When your daughter returns she'll become the best I swear it. And then as Itachi rose to close the door he saw 2 leaves fall off a tree and dance around each other before they landed on the ground. He smiled before closing the door and heading to bed himself. Next morning, this is so awesome. Naruto yelled as she pumped her fist in the air as she and Itachi made their way to a forgotten entrance away from the gates. Only the Hokage and those they trust knew about the entrance, the only way to it was through the forest. Naruto stared up to Itachi with her backpack on her back, she wore dark blue ninja shoes, blue pants, and a dark orange shirt, her long hair as in a small ponytail, and she had 2 gloves on her hands. She kept staring at him before saying Itachi-kun do you think I'll get strong? Itachi blinked before looking down to the little girl, he then saw her put her head down to look at the ground as she said, do you think I'll get as strong as Mama and Papa was? Jiji told me they were the strongest. Itachi kept staring before he patted the girl on the head softly before saying one day you might. It just depends on how much you try, but the true reason why your parents were so strong was because they had people they cared about and people they loved, the people they loved with their hearts, gave them the strength to fight and be strong. Just think of the people you love Naruto-chan and you'll get there. Naruto stopped and stared up her big blue eyes staring deeply into his, she smiled softly and said as she stared at him so all I have to do is think of Jiji, Snake, and you. Itachi stopped and stared down to the young Uzumaki who smiled to him, he gave a rare soft smile and said yes. Naruto's face grew more happy. She smiled as they walked farther down the old forgotten road. They spoke of small things and Naruto couldn't help but feel safe around Itachi. She and Itachi soon stopped at the old gate door. And standing in front of the forgotten gates were the Hokage and Snake. Naruto and Itachi walked closer before hearing from the old Hokage Itachi Naruto, they both looked to the Hokage who seemed happy but sad at the same time, he was holding onto a big scroll. The Hokage stared at the little girl and said Naruto-chan. This scroll was your father's, inside it has his justice he created, this is for your eyes only. Learn from it, become strong and always remember to fight with your heart, always fight what you know is right. He had bent down to level his eyes with a little girl who smiled at her Jiji, she watched him reach the scroll out and she slowly took it from him. The Hokage watched before saying you look so much like them both. You have your father's eyes, hair, smile, talent, strength, wit, good judgment, and his loyalty. Your mother she was beautiful, funny, strong, cunning, loud, short-tempered, always ready for a fight, but the most important thing about her, the same thing I see in you, is her love and belief for everyone and everything around her. Naruto-chan you are a perfect mix of your parents, and I know that in the future, you'll become strong, caring, lovable, funny, cunning, beautiful, and you'll stand for your and your friends' beliefs. Naruto-chan, please, never lose your light, never lose your love. Naruto blinked and smiled more, but tears started to come into her eyes as she held onto the scroll tightly. She heard from her Jiji again. Naru-chan, be careful out in this world, people are cunning and evil and will hurt you if you give them that chance. Do not back down, do not give in, do not give up. Your mother always promised with her heart that she'll never give up, she'll never let fate or destiny take over her life, that when she spoke of promises, she kept them. Never once did she go back on her word, never once did she back down, never once did she leave a friend behind. She was a woman who had sacrificed her life more than once in battle for those she promised. I had heard many times from people she worked for that she is their pillar of light, a pillar for a better tomorrow, a pillar of hope and love. The Hokage then saw tears falling down the girl's face, she smiled, and she held tighter to the scroll and heard the words, your father, he was the same, a promise for a better tomorrow, a leader for the lights, a leader for those lost in their own darkness and sadness. He loved everything and everyone, but he always knew what was right and wrong, he always had good judgment. It was said that when he smiled it was a sign that the world was going to change for the better. He always could put strength, courage, hope, and change in those that needed it dearly. He never turned his back on a friend, never gave up on his dreams, and never let his own sorrow and pain to cloud his life. When your mother and father were together fighting for a better tomorrow, it was like they were as one, both fight greatly and never dared to stop until it was ended. Your parents hated war more than anything, and when they spoke their words of love, promise, and hope it changed so many people who lost themselves. Naru-chan, I don't expect you to be just like them, I want you to be yourself. I just have a feeling you'll become great, you'll become a leader of light and a pillar of hope like they were. The Hokage saw the girl smile brighter and brighter, she wiped the tears from her eyes before saying thank you Jiji, thank you. Before the Hokage could say any more he saw Naruto hug him dearly. The Hokage was surprised for a moment before he smiled softly and hugged the girl in return. After a moment of hugging and tears, the Hokage looked up to Itachi who watched silently. He rose and said, Itachi. Itachi stared up to the Hokage and nodded slowly. The Hokage then said, take care of her, don't let her get hurt, and please protect her with your life, she's like a granddaughter to me. Itachi nodded before watching Naruto and Snake talk among themselves. The Hokage watched too before saying to Itachi, I have sent a letter to Tsunade along with Shizune and Jiraiya, telling them everything. I have no doubt that they'll both come racing down here to yell at me or kill me, and then when they're done they'll be tracking you down to try to take her away from you so they can protect her. After all, they both loved Kushina and Minato dearly with their hearts. If you come across them, do not let them have her, but tell them they can train her, but after they are done training her, she will stay with you. Do not let them run off with her. Itachi raised an eyebrow before saying they didn't know. The Hokage shook his head and said they knew that Minato and Kushina were having a baby girl and that she was alive, they just didn't know where she was. When they'll read the letters, they'll be on your tail. When I told them she was alive, Tsunade ordered that I allow Naruto to stay with her, and so she can protect the child with her life. Jiraiya said the same thing, but he wanted to train her, so she may stand on her own 2 feet when the time comes. Image what would happen if she was trained by Tsunade or Jiraiya. Itachi stood there for a moment and thought for a while, that would be bad. The little girl would love gambling and drinking, but she would have made a great medical ninja. Then if she was with Jiraiya, Itachi shuddered at the thought of the little girl becoming a female pervert or worse, but still she would have been a great and powerful fighter. He then heard and remember, not only will they be after you, but so will all of Kushina's and Minato's old enemies. Even Orochimaru would be on your tail when he hears she's out of the village. He hated Minato with a passion and would like nothing more than to kill Minato's child with his own hands or brainwash her into destroying Konoha. Itachi looked to the Hokage and said with a bow and respect, I swear on my life, as not only a Uchiha, but as a loyal Konoha ninja, that I will protect, even in death, my teachers and the 4th Hokage's only daughter, and that if I fail this mission, I will take my own life. The Hokage gave a small smile before he and Itachi looked back to see Naruto and Snake saying, Brat, you better come back alive. Naruto nodded before saying, and Snake, you better get better at being a Anbu. I can still prank you to death. Snake smiled under her mask before nudging the little girl's head. Naruto laughed before saying, Snake, I pinky promise to come back, and when I do, I'll beat you in a spar. Snake laughed too before saying, I hope to see that, you little brat. Naruto held her pinky out and Snake did the same. They pinky promised each other to see each other once again when the time came. Naruto and Itachi soon said their last goodbyes to Snake and the Hokage before turning slowly away, but right before they left, Itachi said to the Hokage, Hokage-sama, tell Sasuke I'm sorry, even if he doesn't understand why, but please, don't tell him the truth. I want to be the one who tells him if I am given that chance. The Hokage nodded and Naruto stared up worried for a moment before looking back to her Jiji and smiling with a grin. The Hokage gave a small pat on the head and one last hug before watching her and Itachi walk away. They watched for a moment as she and Itachi almost made it over a hill. Naruto turned back fast and yelled out, Jiji, Snake. I promise I will return. I will become strong like Mama and Papa, and I will never back down on my dreams. Or my name isn't Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze. The Hokage and Snake stared at each other before seeing Naruto wave a few last goodbyes and Itachi wave a small one. Itachi watched as he and his sensei's daughter lose sight of the village. Itachi sighed and looked down for a moment before thinking, Sasuke, I'll come back soon and I'll tell you the truth, even if you hate me and you'll never believe me, but before I do that I need to kill that man and protect Kushina-sensei's only daughter. Itachi looked to his side and saw Naruto excited about the outside world. To her it was a brand new adventure. But the Hokage, you did the right thing, Hokage-sama, Snake said as she saw the blonde she thought as a little sister leave with a very powerful ninja. The Hokage looked up and took a smoke from his pipe softly before saying, this afternoon I will announce the deaths of the Uchiha clan, and that Sasuke is the only one alive, of course that will be bad. Then in 4 days I will announce that Naruto Uzumaki is really a girl, and that she is the long-lost daughter of Kushina Uzumaki and Minato Namikaze, and the only heir to their fortune, and that she has left the village and will return when she is 10 years of age. Snake watched a small smirk curl up to his lips as he said, this ought to be fun, I've been meaning to get back at those morons for wanting her death since the day she was born. Snake smirked too under her mask, before asking, by the way, when do you think she'll learn about, you know what? The Hokage looked to Snake before looking back to the hill, as if trying to see the blonde. He sighed and said, I have given Itachi clearance to speak of it, Snake. He will tell her when the time is right or he will not at all. Snake nodded before looking back to the hill too. Next few days, the Hokage stood in front of the Konoha council. He tried his hardest not to smirk at what he was about to say. This was going to be so fun. The council quieted down as they saw their Hokage stand up. Oh, how he was going to have fun messing with their heads for the next few days with this. He spoke, as you all know I have asked you to come for an important meeting. Everyone nodded. The ones that were trained to be a ninja was questioning the twitching smirk coming on the face of their Hokage. He then said, as we all remember, Kushina Uzumaki and Minato Namikaze were seeing each other, am I right? Most men twitched at that, and so did a few women. Most men in the room had a crush on Kushina, and most women in the room had a crush on Minato when they were growing up. All of Konoha had known those two were dating, and they were mostly taking bets on when they were going to marry. The Hokage then said, I am here to tell you important secret, something I was hoping to kept it a secret till it is time, but due to certain events, I must tell you this. Kushina and Minato had gotten married a year and a half before their deaths. Everyone in the room gasped softly, and those that did not twitched at this information. The Hokage placed his hands up to keep them from yelling out. He then said they kept it a secret because it was during the war and Minato did not want his wife in danger. So they married in secret. Only I, Jiraiya, Tsunade, Shizune, and Snake knew of their marriage. He left Itachi's name out for good reason. The Hokage saw their shocked faces before continuing, and we were the only ones who knew Kushina was pregnant with their only child, who is alive. Everyone's eyes widened, and they stared in disbelief at their Hokage. One woman with light pink hair by the name Taiku Haruno said they had a child. When? Where is the child? Most of the council members asked the same thing. Again the Hokage raised his hands up to calm them down. When they did, he spoke, saying she has been living away from the village in a small house in the forest that only I and Snake know how to get to. She looks much like her mother, but has more of her father's hair and eyes. She is like a little angel. Everyone stared as they saw the Hokage think back to his memories to those days he spent with the girl. He then said, I dared not to tell you all until she had come of age, but again due to certain things I am telling you now. She had been living alone for a while, and the Ashi Hyuga then cut in, if that is so, Hokage-sama, then allow her to live with me and my family. Minato and Kushina were close friends of mine and my wife. And I would be more than honored to have their only child within my clan. Sumin Yuzuka stopped him. She yelled out as she pointed to the Hyuga like hell. Kushina and I were the best of friends growing up. If that little girl is going to live with someone, it's going to be my clan. Hiashi shot a glare at the dog user. Soon the room erupted with arguments and yelling over who the little girl should live with. But it stopped when they heard from Shikaku Nara, she isn't here in Konoha, is she, Hokage-sama? Everyone looked to the Nara, who had his arms folded before looking back to their Hokage, who smirked softly and said, smart as always, Shikaku, it's true, she isn't here, she is going on a training trip with a strong ninja who swore to protect her with his life. She plans to train her hardest so she may become great like her parents. She will be returning in 3 years if you want to know. Danzo was the one who spoke. I say we engage her with the last remaining Uchiha. When they come to age they will marry. Everyone in the room spoke again. Some with sons or nephews of their own argued with that. The Hokage twitched softly before saying, I'm sorry, but that is something I can't allow. If she wishes to marry someone, it will be someone she loves, not someone she is being forced to marry. Besides, I'm sure Minato will haunt your lives for even suggesting such a thing. At those words, many shuddered at the thought. When it came down to it, Minato was a very protective person, and if he was alive, he would have killed anyone who thought of having his only daughter marry someone, and would be worse if Minato knew it was to Uchiha. That's when Inoichi Yamanaka asked, what is her name, Hokage-sama? Everyone stopped and quieted down again. They looked to the Hokage, who smirked again. He looked up to them and said her name. Well, her name is Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze, of course. Everyone gasped and some almost had a heart attack. They had knew the name of the demon vessel, even though they had never seen him, and had been thrown into a state of shock. Some were about to yell out if he was joking, but the Hokage beat them to it. I told you Naruto was a boy for her safety, just in case. I was planning to have her hide herself in a henge and pretend to be a boy when the time comes, but now that she is out of the village and being trained, I have no fear anymore. I also lied about the fact she had no parents, when in fact her parents were the ones you all cared deeply for. The Ashi spoke up. Then that means Minato used the Hokage, nodded softly and said yes, he didn't dare to burden another families with this, so he did it to his only child. The only one he knew would understand why he chose her, the only one that was born on October 10th. Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze is his only blood, and he chose her to seal the nine-tailed beast in, so none of your own children would have to face that fate. Everyone was silent, some were thinking long and hard, while others were trying to see if this was a dream. The Hokage watched their faces turn to remorse and sorrow when they remembered how they wanted the child's death, while others were broken in their heads. The Hokage rose and was about to leave the room when the doors opened harshly. He looked up and saw the door had been opened by a very pissed-off Tsunade and Jiraiya. The Hokage's eyes widened and he started to pray to God as they both yelled out at the same time, "You old idiot. How can you let Naruto-chan go out into the world with only one protector? I swear I am going to kill you, and when I'm done, I'm going after her and her protector, and I swear I am going to take her with me and train her myself." Meanwhile down below on the bottom level, Shizune winced at the level of loudness from the room far above her. She stopped when she saw a snake Anbu roaring with laughter on the floor holding her sides. The now bruised and almost broken third Hokage smiled softly as he stared out the window of his office after both Jiraiya and Tsunade had yelled and beaten the shit out of their old sensei. The news of Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze spread like wildfire in all of Konoha and the other countries, and it was only the end of the week. Currently, both seinen were looking high and low for Minato's and Kushina's baby girl. The Hokage winced at the pain in his arm as he remembered what Kakashi did when he learned that the daughter of his sensei and Kushina was alive and gone. It took nearly almost 7 Anbus to get Kakashi away. After that, Kakashi demanded to be allowed to go find his sensei's daughter and protect and train her instead of the mysterious man that was sent with her. But of course the Hokage said no to that, and since then Kakashi would either ask for the permission to leave or send evil glares to the Hokage for not being told. The Hokage didn't mind really, he deserved it, he did after all tell Kakashi Naruto was dead that night the Kyuubi attacked. As for the villagers, most were suffering from heart attacks and mental breakdowns after finding out. The ones who wanted the child's death nearly cried and had nightmares at the thought of Minato and Kushina coming back to haunt them after all the times they yelled out for her death. The ones that did not want the child's death in the beginning couldn't help but glare and deny service at those that did when they lied about never wanting her death. The children on the other hand didn't understand why their parents, grandparents, uncles, aunts, older brothers and sisters, etc. were freaking out from the news. At first they thought it was because the fourth Hokage and the legendary Red Whirlpool both had a child, but the more smarter ones knew it went deeper than that. When the younger children found out the girl was around their age, most of the students and children tried to find the girl to befriend her because she was the daughter of Minato and Kushina, but after finding out she was out of the village and was going to train, they soon ignored it and went back with their lives. The Hokage looked down to a paper in his hand. It was the first letter he had gotten from Naruto and Itachi. Here he read it. "Dear Gigi. Hi, it's me, Naruto. Just writing to tell you how we're doing. Itachi-sensei letting me write the letter. Where to start I know. Guess what Itachi let me do? He let me eat some candy. I don't think he believed you when you said not to let me eat too much. Heh, he got the shock of his life when I started bouncing off the walls. But man do I have a killer headache after that yeah. Oh, I need to tell you, the Akatsuki came to Itachi yesterday. They offered him a part in it. Itachi took the offer and is getting the info you wanted. He said, I'm going to have to stay in a village near the base and pretend to be the daughter of a traveling merchant who can't take his daughter on his travels. He also said that when he's out on missions he's going to have to sneak me along to train me. He said this mission will be hard, but as long as the Akatsuki doesn't know about me it's going to be okay. By the way, I know about it. Itachi told me when we reached a village not too far from Konoha. He felt it was not right to keep the secret from me, and at first I really thought I was a demon, but he yelled at me, yes Itachi-sensei yelled, that I was not and that I'm 100% human in his eyes. I am kind of mad at you and Snake for not telling, but I know you both had your reasons. Anyway, let me tell you about my training. Itachi-sensei is making me do 2 of mom's justice and 1 of dad's for starters. He says I'm not so bad. I need to train harder if I want to be like mom and dad. He also said that if do good and learn them within the month he's going to get me ramen. Ramen yummy anyway. I might have to do 2 maybe 3 all-nighters if I want to win that bet. Also some crazy lady with pigtails, her friend who carries a pig, and some strange dude with white hair have been looking for me and Itachi, or so I've been told. Itachi told me that someone told him that they have been looking for us, or namely me, if you want to narrow it down. Itachi said something about them getting here faster than he wanted them to. Do you know them, Gigi? I'm not sure if I should trust them, but Itachi-sensei told me if I met them that I should allow them to train me, but not run off with me. Anyway, I better get going, Itachi-sensei is getting impatient that I'm not training, bye. From, Naruto UN. PS. Please send me some ramen from that place you got for me a few nights ago, I miss the taste. The Hokage took a bit of smoke from his pipe before blowing it out. He looked to the sunset that came over his village and thought with a small chuckle, come back soon, both of you. Time skipped to 3 years later. Deep sky blue eyes and dark coal eyes looked to the village in front of two figures, one was the size of a 10-year-old and the other was the size of a 17-year-old. They both wore cloaks that had hoods over their heads and they both seemed to be transfixed on the village, but both were on guard. The youngest spoke up, it's good to be back, I almost forgot how it was to look at Konoha from far away. The older one gave a small little chuckle huff and said funny how you miss a place you never went into. The youngest huffed and said as the child crossed her arms, well sorry if I never got to go into the village because Gigi was scared for me. The eldest just shook his head but soon heard, so should we head into the front gates or through the secret entrance? The child, who was a girl, said as she pointed to the gates with the guards at the post. The eldest person, who was male, said secret entrance. The Hokage doesn't know we're here and we don't have any papers on us. The eldest watched the youngest pout and say, damn Akatsuki, ruining everything I swear. And here I wanted to do was go into Konoha with a big entrance. The oldest just shook his head softly and said, it doesn't matter. The youngest stopped him as she pointed to him, almost yelling, it does to me, Itachi Itausen. Because of them I can't send any letters to Haku-kun or Zabuza-sensei. It was true, ever since they had the Akatsuki on their tails last year, they normally couldn't send out any letters without it getting interfered by them. The young man named Itachi let his hood down and said to the youngest, whose blue eyes shone under the hood, I know, but after today we'll request a different messenger bird, that way you'll be able to send all the letters you want to Haku-kun and Zabuza-san. Okay Naruto-chan. Itachi said the name Haku as if it was poison on his tongue. Naruto rolled her eyes and said to her father, as she took the hood of her head showing long blonde hair that was tied in a ponytail, Itachi Itausen, for the last time, I do not like Haku like that, me and him are just friends, besides he's like a big brother to me. Itachi rolled his eyes, said right, and that 4-minute kiss you gave him when you said goodbye makes me believe it. Naruto blushed deep crimson and yelled out, that wasn't mine or Haku's fault, Zabuza-sensei pushed us into each other and you know it. Itachi rolled his eyes again as he watched his daughter go on a rampage. Meanwhile, the Hokage was worried. No, he was more than worried. He hadn't heard from Itachi or Naruto for almost a year. Sure, he knew why, but it still worried him. The last letter he had gotten was that the Akatsuki found out Naruto was with him and was hunting them down, and that their letters were being taken by the Akatsuki, so it was going to be the last letter they'll send until they return. He gave a sigh and winced as he remembered the pain Kakashi gave him when he found out about the Akatsuki after her. No one but the third, Snake, Haku, Zabuza, Tsunade, Shizune, and Jiraiya know that Itachi is Naruto's protector and teacher. He was pulled out of it when he suddenly felt the seal over the secret entrance being open. His eyes narrowed before Snake came in. She spoke, Hokage-sama, I felt someone undo the seal over the entrance. The Hokage nodded and said, I felt it too, let's go. She nodded and they both disappeared into a cloud of smoke. Back to Naruto and Itachi. Naruto happily got rid of the cloak and stretched, a smile on her tan face. She wore a light blue undershirt that was hardly seen, a orange shirt with the Uzumaki swirl on it, 3 little black rubber bracelets on her wrists. She wore almost silver blue pants and blue shinobi shoes. She also had her belt hang off a bit to her side. A necklace was hidden under the shirts. She got done stretching when she started walking to catch up with her father. Over the years she had spent with the eldest Uchiha, Naruto had started to see him as her father. He was kind and cared deeply for her. His favorite thing was to embarrass her sometimes, and he didn't like it when boys around a little over her age stared at her when they both entered a village. Even if she was too young to think of dating, Itachi would send hate glares to any boy when he was hiding in either the shadows or under a henge. When Itachi would henge, he would henge as a tall tan-skinned man with short messy blonde hair and blue eyes. Itachi watched his daughter walking to catch up with him. He couldn't help but remember the times she had to run to catch up with him. It was cute and funny when she would yell at him to wait or to slow down. Itachi shook his head. It was weird. At first he had only thought of her as his sensei's daughter and his student, but over the years, she somehow became like a daughter and little sister in his eyes. There was just one little thing he hated, that thing was boys. He didn't like the way they would look at her, he didn't like it at all. He knew that some were too young to even like girls, but some knew she was cute and at the age they were, they might have gotten the young idea on how to treat a girl. Itachi mostly didn't like the boy Haku they met a year after they left Konoha. The boy was too close to his daughter's heart and one wrong move could hurt her. He mostly didn't like the fact they kissed when they had said goodbye. Sure, Zabuza pushed them, but they still kissed for 4 minutes before they both broke apart blushing and in a complete loss. Zabuza laughed at the two blushing 8-year-olds as Itachi was in a loss too, but it was soon replaced by a glare. Since that day, whenever Naruto spoke of Haku, he would glare at the name or say something about the kiss. They kept walking until they reached the middle. Both could feel the coming of two chakra signatures coming at them. Both tensed and was ready to fight, but they broke out of it when they saw a familiar old man and a woman with a snake mask come from a tree. The Hokage was about to say something, but stopped himself when he noticed the blonde next to the young man. His and Snake's eyes widened. One name came from both their lips: Naruto-chan. Naruto got out of her fighting stance and smiled big to her old-time friends. She couldn't help but say, "Hey Snake, hey Gigi. I'm back." The Hokage couldn't believe his eyes, nor could Snake believe it. After almost 3 years, standing right in front of them was the little girl they remembered from years ago. She had grew, there was no doubt about that. She was taller and if possible, more cute. The Hokage suddenly was hugged, attacked by said blonde. She held tight on him and said, "Gigi. Aren't you going to say something?" He got out of his daze and smiled down to the child he thought as a granddaughter. He said, "Naruto-chan. You're back." He hugged her back before she let go and looked to Snake. "Hey Snake, long time no see." She smiled it out. Snake broke out of her daze too and nodded. She then went over and roughed Naruto's hair, saying, "Nice to see you too, brat." Naruto grinned a bit before saying, "Get ready Snake, because when we get the chance, I want to show you all the cool moves I learned from Itachi Itaosan. I even got to make some of my own." Snake smiled and said, "Bring it kid." She then stopped and said with question, "Itaosan." Naruto nodded and said as she looked back, "Itachi Itaosan, say something. You haven't said anything to Gigi or Snake." The Hokage and Snake looked over to Itachi, who hid himself under the cloak. He smirked a bit under it and said, "It's nice to see you both Hokage-sama, Snake-san." The Hokage was a bit stunned but soon understood. The Hokage then said, "Let's head to the tower. It's a far better place than out here in the woods right now." Naruto nodded and so did Itachi. Soon they started their walk run to Konoha. Naruto and Itachi reached the tower with ease but took the window way in, while the Hokage and Snake took the doorway. When the Hokage saw them go in through the window, he sighed and said, "Why don't you guys use the door like everyone else?" Naruto grinned and said, "Iro-senin said it's funnier to use a window instead." The Hokage stopped and repeated the word Iro-senin. Naruto nodded as Itachi said, "Jiraiya-sama." Iro-senin is what Naruto calls him because she saw him peeping on some women at the bathhouses one day. Snake held in a chuckle for a moment as she heard the nickname that suited the old pervert. The Hokage on the other hand smiled and did chuckle a bit. That's when Naruto said, "Yeah, then Bach-an and Shizune beat his butt when I screamed out he was watching them." This time Snake asked but knew who she meant, Bach-an. Itachi nodded as Naruto grinned big. He said, "Tsunade-sama." Naruto calls her that because she knows that Tsunade-sama is using a Justu to make her look young. The Hokage laughed to himself, while Snake just laughed out and shook her head at the grinning child. The Hokage then went to his chair as the others took a seat in the room. He stared at them and asked, "Now mind to tell me why I haven't heard from you two in almost a year, hum?" Both Naruto and Itachi stopped and stared at each other. Even though Itachi was hidden under his cloak, you could see he was worried. Itachi spoke, "It was my fault, Hokage-sama, I wasn't being careful. The Akatsuki found out about Naruto being in my care and soon found out about her demon. They attacked me and I almost didn't escape. I rushed back to the village Naruto was staying in and told her we needed to go. We left and sent a message to you, but we soon found out that letter was taken from our message bird, so in a rush we sent one more, this time being closer to Konoha, so we knew they couldn't take the message. After that we have been going from village to village, hiding, going by different names, we even placed hinges over ourselves. Akatsuki was after us and we knew we couldn't send any more letters out to anyone." Itachi heard a mutter of, "I bet Haku-kun is sad because I haven't been talking to him." Itachi rolled his eyes at the name of the boy. The Hokage nodded a bit. He took his pipe out and started to smoke some of it. He then said, "Now. I bet you both wish to get a new messenger bird, am I right?" They nodded and Itachi then said, "Not only that, but Naruto-chan is now at the age we agreed for her to be, so she enter in the academy." The Hokage nodded at this. Snake then said, "I can't wait to see what the council members will do now that she is back." The Hokage sighed a bit and said, "I'll call all of them to a meeting. It's better to get over with this now instead of later." Naruto was then fidgeting in her seat. She had been staring and glancing out to the village from the window for a while and wanted to see it. She turned to the Hokage, Snake, and Itachi was talking about the council members. The Hokage then ordered Snake to go out and get the members. Snake nodded and rushed out. Even though she hated some of those council fools, it was an order from her Hokage. Naruto then begged out now that her patience was over, "Gigi, can I please go out to the village, please?" The Hokage sighed a bit but said, "I'm sorry, but no, you need to see the council members before you can go out. They have been yelling at me since I told them about you, and if they knew you were running around Konoha before they get to meet you, well, I don't want to hear their screeching again." Naruto pouted and sighed. Itachi shook his head a bit, the Hokage rolled his eyes for a moment before saying come on, let's head to the meeting room before the others get there. It wasn't long before the council members came in, many were confused at why their Hokage called for a last-minute meeting, what could have been wrong? Were they being attacked? Was another demon coming? Just what? They all seated themselves and stared at their Hokage, who had the same look on his face like 3 years ago when he told them around Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze. Then they froze, it had to do with her, he only had that face when it meant something about Naruto. They all wanted to know but at the same time they were afraid of what he might say. The Hokage spoke. As you all know, 3 years ago, Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze left with one of my most trusted Anbus. They nodded and gulped. He then said, and I had told you she'll return after 3 years of training. Everyone nodded again. They watched the Hokage smirk and say well just a few hours ago, she has returned to Konoha along with her protector. With that said the room erupted with shouts of really? And where is she? The Hokage watched them go crazy with questions, he waited until he raised his hand up to shut them up. When they did, he said now, I will make this clear now. Naruto-chan will not engage to any boy now that she has returned. Some went why not? While others nodded, the Hokage went on and she will have the choice and right to live with anyone from any clan, she will not, and I mean not be forced to move in with anyone, it's her choice, no one else's. Understand? Everyone nodded, some were a bit sad at the idea. The Hokage nodded a bit before turning to the doors behind him as he said, you both may enter now. He waited for a bit as the doors opened, but all he heard was Hokage-sama, we have a little problem. The Hokage's face frowned a bit as he only saw Itachi, who was still wearing his hood and cloak. He then asked what problem? Itachi spoke this time with some amusement. Naruto-chan got tired of waiting, so she snuck out and went into Konoha. The Hokage's eye twitched a bit. Naruto looked up to the tower and snickered, there was no way in heaven or hell would she wait any longer. Plus she just didn't feel like meeting the council members before getting to know people of Konoha before they know who she was and who her parents were. She then looked from the rooftop of a house she was sitting on and smiled brightly, today was the day to see the village her mother and father protected with their lives. She could shops and little stores, she could see houses and plants, she could also see a building not too far from where she was. The sky was blue above her as she looked across the building top, her eyes were mesmerized at the sight of the village. She looked around memorizing the places just in case. She got off from the rooftop and jumped down to the streets below, she stared up with both wonder and question. She went by many people who stopped and stared at her, some looked at her as if they had just saw a ghost. Naruto started to run around looking at everything around her, a smile placed on her face as she ran by, staring at the shops and houses. She stopped when she was near the Konoha Ninja Academy if she had it right. She stared at the place and heard the bell rang for recess, she smiled again and looked to the kids that ran out to play and talk to their friends, some even stared at her for a second before turning away and chatting. She just stood there and stared from behind the gate fence. Her smile faded when she noticed a group of 4 girls with anger on their faces coming over to a little girl around her age near a bench. Naruto's eyes narrowed a bit at the sight. Naruto noticed how the small girl looked up to them and started to get up so she could back away with fear as they spoke to her, and then in a flash, the little girl was on the ground because she was pushed by one of the 4 older girls. They laughed and snickered at her. Naruto's hand clutched. She didn't understand why they hated her, most of the girls just did. She wondered if it was because she was weak or shy. She sat on the ground and closed her eyes ready to take the punch the bully was going to give. Waited, and nothing came. Her eyes opened, and what she saw made them wide. A girl around her age with long bright blonde hair stood in front of her. How did the girl get there without making any sounds? It was like she just came there in that moment. Who was she? Hinata watched the other bullies gasp, and their eyes widened as they saw the blonde hold onto their leader's fist tightly. The blonde spoke and said, picking on someone younger than you, how pathetic. Hinata watched as the leader of the bullies was about ready to yell at the blonde, but was then suddenly thrown back and she smacked against her friends. She watched the blonde get into a fighting stance and she then said, bring it on. Hinata could hear people coming to watch the catfight. She stared at the blonde and closed her eyes as she saw the punch the leader was going to give to her savior. Hinata and the others stared wide-eyed and in awe at the beaten girls on the floor. They looked like they were hurt badly. They watched the blonde dust her hands off and huff at the girls before saying, next time, don't mess with her or otherwise you'll have to deal with me again, darn it. The girls groaned a bit in pain and Naruto smirked. She turned back and looked to Hinata as she smiled brightly to the girl. She walked over and held her hand out so the small girl could get up. Hinata stared at the hand before slowing reaching for it. When she placed her hand in the other's hand, she was suddenly pulled up and heard her ask, you okay? Hinata stared into the blue eyes and nodded softly. Naruto smiled and said good. She felt the hand let go and watched Naruto about ready to leave, but stopped when she heard wait. Naruto turned back and stared at the now blushing and stuttering girl. Thank you, why you saved me. Naruto smiled brightly before saying no problem. But Naruto's smile faded as she asked out, but why on earth were they messing with you? By the looks of it, it seems like you didn't want to fight them. Hinata was a bit surprised, but said in her low stuttering voice, I don't know they just do. Almost 2 times a day. Naruto's eyes narrowed a bit, but she then said, that doesn't seem right. She turned back to the girls and walked over. She could hear them groaning in fear. Naruto picked the leader up by the collar and said, now, mind to tell me why you wanted to hurt her. The girl twitched in pain but muttered out, Sasuke-kun only talks to her. He only talks to her. Naruto rolled her eyes and let the girl go. She turned back around and walked over to Hinata. She then took Hinata's hand and started to stomp out of the school grounds. She pushed past the other kids who stared at them. When they reached the gates, Naruto said under her breath, stupid fangirls, should have known they'd mess with a girl who has no idea what she did. She stopped when she heard excuse me, but where are we going? Naruto turned back to Hinata and smiled as she said, we are going to get something to eat. I haven't eaten yet today, and besides, I don't think you want to go back and face those girls, do you? I mean, all I did was give them a few punches and they mostly worn themselves out. Hinata slowly shook her head but said, but my father he isn't going to like the fact I have left. Naruto stopped her and said, does he also know about you getting picked on? Hinata grew quiet and looked to the ground. Naruto then said, so what's missing out on one school day going to do, huh? Hinata watched Naruto's mouth turn into a smile. She then asked out, who are you? Naruto smiled brighter and said, Naruto, just call me Naruto for now. Hinata blinked before hearing, and what's your name? Hinata stared at the blue eyes before answering softly, Hinata Hyuga, and my name is Hinata Hyuga. Naruto smiled and said, nice name, way better than mine. Hinata couldn't help but giggle a little as they started walking again out of the school. Unknowing to them, a few pairs of eyes watched them before following suit. Why on earth did Naruto leave? The Hokage asked with a twitch on his smile. Itachi shrugged softly and said, well, under his hood, don't know, sometimes she leaves without telling me, mostly it's because she knows I'm going to ground her or she wants something to eat. But in this case I guess she wanted to see Konoha for the first time. Hokage-sama, that or she got hungry. I swear, she eats like her father and mother at the same time. Excuse me, but who are you? Came a voice behind the Hokage and Itachi. They turned back to the pink-haired woman. Taiku watched as the Hokage said, everyone, this is my most trusted Anbu, who has been watching dear Naruto-chan for the past 3 years. He has been teaching her the justice her parents used and what he could not. She learned from reading a scroll or was taught by Tsunade and Jiraiya. Some gasped a bit, but then Taiku asked, she was also taught by Tsunade-sama and Jiraiya-sama. Itachi nodded a little and said yes, but not much, she only learned a few things from them. I don't want her to grow up too fast, she is still a child and needs her emotions. She has learned about 4 medical justice from Tsunade-sama and is currently in training to summon the toads. She hasn't signed the contract yet though. Both Jiraiya-sama and I agreed it's best to wait until she is 12. Toads? She's going to sign with the toads. Why not something else? Like with the cats or heck, even the birds, why the toads? The pink-haired woman said, making a disgusting face at the thought of a small girl summoning up disgusting toads. Before the Hokage or Itachi could answer, Hiashi said, why not? Her dad signed with the toads, so it's only natural and right that she signs up too. He had on a smug smile like he knew everything. But it disappeared when Itachi said actually, she didn't know about the toads being her father's summons until after she agreed with Jiraiya-sama to start training to summon. She had saw Jiraiya-sama use the summons once to fight off some bandits and she, how shall I say this, fell in love with them. Everyone looked to the cloaked man who said she begged and bugged Jiraiya-sama for 3 days to let her sign with the toads, and when he finally agreed to it, he told her that her own father had signed with the toads long ago, and because of knowing that, Naruto-chan was even more excited. She can't wait to sign the contract. Hiashi waited, but everyone heard, but why wait that long? Doesn't she want to become strong like her parents? Why wait when she can go on ahead of the others? Everyone turned to Tsume, who was, surprising, quiet that day. Itachi smirked a bit and said she was once the type to rush into things, but one day, it nearly ended our lives. 3 months after we left Konoha, we were attacked by Chunin-level ninjas, and she rushed in to battle them, but one was an undercover Anbu that we didn't know about. He had poisoned one of his weapons that hit me when it was going to hit Naruto. It was a new type of poison too, so not even Naruto knew how to take out, so for a while I was bedridden in a cabin near the sea for a while. It felt like it was slowly eating me inside. He stopped as he remembered the pain of the poison inside of him. Even if Naruto was the one that got hit, it still would had hurt even with the Kyuubi inside of her. It felt like small bugs were eating him inside, and it caused nightmares in his mind. He then went on with the story. Naruto was worried sick for me, so she went off searching for doctors in nearby villages, but not one could get the poison out. That was until Naruto heard about Tsunade-sama. She set out to find clues and the whereabouts of Tsunade-sama. She crossed miles of forest and villages just to find Tsunade-sama and Shizune-chan at a casino. As a matter of fact, because of that incident we met up with Tsunade-sama and Shizune-chan for the first time. She saved my life twice. Because of her, I am able to stand here today. She risked her life to save mine when she traveled to find Tsunade-sama. She begged Tsunade-sama to come heal me. After that, Naruto promised she wouldn't do anything that reckless again. Everyone gasped and gaped at the story. The Hokage shot a glare at Itachi and said, "You didn't tell me that." Itachi looked to the Hokage and said, "She didn't want you to know." The Hokage glared and said with a demanding voice, "And why not?" Itachi shrugged and said, "She said she didn't want to worry you." The Hokage was about to explode as he said, "Worry me? I was already worried. She is like the granddaughter I never had, and I was worried every day and night, hoping she was okay." Itachi then said, "Hokage-sama, it's okay, she's still the same old Naruto-chan, you saw her yourself, she's safe. She just knows that rushing into things like training and battles isn't the brightest idea, she still does it, but now she knows not to underestimate her opponent." The Hokage sighed with anger and gave him a glare for a moment. Meanwhile with Naruto and Hinata, both girls scoped the area for a place to eat. Hinata couldn't help but smile and blush each time she and Naruto checked a place out. She never in her life ever thought of leaving school and having fun outside the gates before. She glanced at Naruto and couldn't help but smile a soft smile, she hadn't had this much fun in a long time. Not since the day before her mother died. Hinata's eyes dimmed a bit as she remembered, her and her mother were happily at the park playing with Hanabi who was 2 at the time, how they laughed and played before the sun had started to set and they needed to go home. It's been 1 whole year since the day she smiled. The next day her mother was sick and died later in the night. Hinata never in all her life cried so hard. She found it hard to smile nowadays, but just being with a girl with blonde hair, just being with Naruto, she couldn't help but smile and laugh at the spunky attitude she sent off. It was like something kept her near the blonde, and just by seeing the blonde cheer or smile, made her feel like she felt when her mother was still alive. She made her feel the same way she felt around her mother, safe, warm, happy. Hinata snapped out of her daze when she heard, "Hey, Hinata-chan, I just found a great place. Come on." She looked up and noticed Naruto pointing at a stand excited about going in. Hinata smiled and ran over to her new friend, and they both walked in not noticing the other kids that had been following them all day. When Hinata went in she noticed not many people were there, like maybe 3 people were sitting at tables. Naruto rushed to a seat at the counter that had menus on them when they seated themselves, and Hinata looked at the menu. A girl a few years older than them came out from the back, she smiled and said hello, and welcome to Ichiraku, what would you like? Naruto grinned and asked out, "Do you sell ramen here?" The girl smiled and said sure do, it's the specialty around here. Naruto grinned more before saying your biggest bowl of miso please. She nodded before looking at Hinata. For a moment she seemed stunned to see a Hyuga in her father's ramen bar, but asked and you? Hinata looked up with a eat before muttering out her answer. The older girl titled her head a bit before hearing from Naruto. "Hinata-chan, speak up. She needs your order." Hinata stared at Naruto before nodding softly and taking a breath. She then said, "Oh, 1 beef please." A small bowl. Naruto frowned a bit as the girl nodded and wrote that down. She then disappeared into the back and all they heard was, "Father, we have 2 orders." Naruto turned to Hinata and said, "Hinata-chan, would you get a little bowl? You're too skinny. You need to eat more." Hinata blinked, she titled her head and said, "T that's not what the other girls said." "T they said, I need to eat less and be like them." Naruto rolled her eyes and said, "If they told you to jump off the Hokage mountain would you?" Hinata shook her head no. They stopped talking when someone said, "Look, I found Hinata and the girl." They both turned around and looked to a boy with brown hair pointing at them from outside the ramen bar. He had 2 triangle marks on his face and a puppy on his head. Suddenly a boy with a coat and glasses went to the boy with the puppy. He looked inside the ramen bar and stared. Then came a few more people. One was a girl with pale long blonde hair and blue eyes. Next to her was a small girl with pink hair and green eyes. Then a boy with pineapple hair who had an earring. Next to that boy was a large boy with swirl marks on his cheeks who was munching away on chips, but the last one that came was a boy with black hair and black eyes. Naruto watched as all of them looked into the ramen bar and stared from Hinata to herself. Naruto though kept her eyes on the black-haired boy, all she could think was he looks like Itachi Atousen. He must be his brother Sasuke. Naruto snapped out of it when the kids came in and rushed over to them. All of them came over and the one with the puppy and the one with the glasses went to Hinata. The one with the puppy said, "Hinata-chan, are you okay? Me and Shino were going to go help you, but that girl got there before we could." The boy stopped and turned to Naruto and said, "Hey, you helped Hinata-chan right?" Naruto nodded a bit. The boy smiled brightly as his puppy barked and wagged its tail, and he said, "Thanks, me and Shino here wanted to help Hinata-chan, but you beat us to it, thanks a lot." Naruto smiled and said, "It was no problem, I don't like watching anyone getting hurt, especially if they get hurt for something they didn't do or know what they did." The boy smiled before saying, "By the way, name's Kiba Inyazuka, and my furry friend on my head is named Akamaru. He's going to be my nin dog when we get older. He's going to be fierce." Naruto smiled and said, "He's a very handsome dog. I also heard a lot about your clan too." Akamaru's tail wagged harder at that. He couldn't help but jump off of his master head and jump on Naruto's lap to lick her face. Kiba was a bit shocked at this as Naruto started laughing at the licks and petting Akamaru. Kiba pulled Akamaru off and asked Akamaru, "What was that about?" Akamaru barked as he tried to get out of his little master's hold so he could go back and lick the young girl again. Kiba raised an eyebrow and said, wait, I get it, everyone keeps calling you cute and you hate that. But she called you a handsome dog. I get it. Akamaru wagged his tail harder and barked again. Naruto giggled a bit before looking at the boy wearing the glasses. He stared at her and said, my name is Shino Aburam and thank you for helping Hinata in her time of need. Naruto smiled a bit before saying the last name to herself, Aburam. As in the clan that uses insects, right? The two girls stiffened at that and looked grossed out. Kiba frowned a bit and Hinata stared a bit worried at the thought of her new friend not liking bugs. The other boys raised an eyebrow at this for a moment. Shino nodded a bit knowing how she was going to act, but what she said surprised him. That awesome, Mayatausen told me about your clan, man I wish I could control insects like you can. It must be cool to be able to fight with insects. Hey, maybe later we can go look for insects together later, I love insects. The Tausen said I should learn about them, I find it cool how they have their skeleton on the outside. What was it called again? Kiba's frown faded and he smiled at this. Hinata smiled softly, while the other boys raised an eyebrow at her. The girls looked more grossed out, while Shino stood there a bit shocked. He snapped out of it and smiled under his coat. Shino then said it's called the exoskeleton. Naruto nodded and said, that's it. Naruto stopped and looked to the others in the ramen bar. The one munching on chips said name's Choji Akimichi, and no I'm not fat, I'm big bone. Naruto gave a look, but said with a smile I know, it's just you enjoy your food huh. Don't worry I do the same. Almost as if on cue, the girl came back with the food. She stared at the kids before heading back in to talk to her father and ask him what time the ninja academy ended again. Everyone stared at the two ramen bowls, but they mostly stared at Naruto's huge bowl. Naruto grinned like a madman, I mean mad girl, and got her chopsticks. She said something the others couldn't hear as she looked like she was praying, and in a flat second, she picked the bowl up and attacked it fast. Everyone watched with grossed out wonder and question. Then in 2 minutes the ramen was eaten and the bowl was placed down. The girl had come back out and couldn't believe her eyes when she saw one huge bowl was eaten by the time she was gone. Naruto smiled and said 2 more please. And can you make the other one shrimp please? The girl nodded a bit stunned before walking back to her dad. Naruto turned back around and said man, this place sure knows how to make some good ramen. Good thing Jiji sends me this stuff every week. But then Naruto thought and good thing I saved some after Itachi Tausen got caught by the Akatsuki, or otherwise I would've gone insane without ramen. Suddenly Naruto picked up her bowl and rubbed her face on it, saying oh ramen, sweet ramen, oh how I love you, nothing in this world shall ever separate us, not even if the world ended, I shall die by your side my sweet nectar of life. Kiba, Shino, and Hinata held in a smile, giggle, or laugh at the little hearts floating around the girl, while the two other girls looked horrified at the ramen the other girl ate. The pineapple boy's mouth said troublesome, and the black-haired boy looked disgusted for a moment. Choji though stared wide-eyed at this before smiling as he said, you're not like the other girls are you? You don't care about your weight huh? Naruto stopped rubbing her face on the ramen bowl and said if I was like the other girls, I would be saying you are fat and I'd hate to be your friend. But no, I'm not, you're just a guy who likes food and I see nothing wrong with that. I love food too. Choji grinned at this before saying mind if I join you guys for lunch, then? Naruto grinned too and said no problem, the more the merrier. Naruto looked at the others and said you guys wanna join, Mayatausen gave me a lot of money today, so I can get almost anything. Akamaru barked as Kiba said free food. And he sat down next to Hinata. Shino nodded softly and sat next to Kiba. Choji grinned and sat on Naruto's other side. The boy with the pineapple hair nodded a bit and muttered a troublesome before sitting next to Choji. The only ones that stood were the other three. Naruto stared at them and said you wanna join? Just then the pale blonde girl said oh no thanks, we just wanted to see if Hinata was okay. What those girls tried to do was way out of hand, anyway, suddenly the pink-haired girl tugged on the blonde's arm and said Ino, we have to get back to school. My mom won't like the fact I skipped. Ino nodded and said okay Sakura. We'll go. Ino stopped and stared at the black-haired boy before asking you coming Sasuke-kun? She smiled with a blush. The dark-haired boy stared at her with a bit of a glare before looking at Naruto then to Hinata and nodding saying yes. He then walked away with Sakura and Ino on his heels, both blushing as they watched Sasuke. Naruto raised an eyebrow a bit and thought yup, that was Itachi's brother alright, but I have a bad feeling about those two girls, I sense trouble for their friendship in the future. I wonder what their names is. Naruto pulled herself out of her thoughts when someone said the girl with pale blonde hair is Ino Yamanaka, and the girl with the pink hair was Sakura Haruno. The boy that left with them was Sasuke Uchiha. Naruto blinked before looking to the pineapple-haired boy. He then said you look like you wanted to know their names. My name is Shikamaru Nara by the way. Naruto smiled and said nice to meet you guys. Then the girl came back out with the ramen. Naruto smiled to her and said excuse me, but can you bring the owner out, I need to talk to him. What's your name? The girl nodded a bit and said, "Oh, I'm sorry, I never told you my name, sorry, it's my first time working with my dad, my name is Am." Naruto smiled and said, "Oh, nice to meet you Am-chan. My name's Naruto." Am giggled a bit and said, "As in the fish cake?" Naruto pouted and said, "No, as in the maelstrom." Am giggled again before going into the back. Naruto sighed a bit before turning to the others saying, "So, can you guys tell me about Konoha? Me and my Atausen have been out training for a while, and we just got to Konoha." Shikamaru stopped reading the menu said, "So you are new? I was wondering why I've never seen you in Konoha before." Naruto nodded a little and said, "Yeah, but I'm not new, I was born here in Konoha, but my Jiji never let me go into Konoha until he thought I was ready, but before I could my Atausen said we'll be going on a 3-year-long training trip. Now that the 3 years are up I'm finally seeing Konoha for the first time." Joji laughed a bit and said, "Well, good thing you started out with Ichiraku, it's the best of ramen all around." Everyone laughed at the tone of his voice, but stopped when a man came out from the back with Am behind him. He looked around before his eyes landed on Naruto. They widened a bit before saying to himself that only Naruto heard "Oh my god, it's like seeing Kushina-chan here for the first time all over again only with yellow hair." Naruto smiled and said to him, "Hi, my name is Naruto, my Jiji sends me a ramen while I was out training, and I have something to tell you." Gucci nodded as he heard the words, that confirmed his theory. He knew this was her, the daughter of Kushina and Minato, his two favorite customers. He himself didn't have anything against Naruto, as a matter of fact, he would tell the Hokage that if Naruto was ever going to come into town, she was always welcomed at his ramen bar when she was still in hiding. The Hokage knew that Tucci had always saw Kushina as his own daughter, since her parents were killed in Whirlpool when she was still a child. As a matter of fact, he was the one that gave Kushina away on her wedding day. He was one of the few the Hokage would ever trust with the small child's care. Naruto then said, snapping Tucci out of his thoughts, "I just have to say, your ramen is the best, and from now on, I, Naruto will always come here every day. You have my word." Hiba and Choji smiled and laughed, Hinata held in a giggle, Shino raised an eyebrow, while Shikamaru said it troublesome under his breath. Am titled her head but heard from her father, "I swear she is just like her mother, she said the same thing when she first came here and tasted the ramen." After a few hours of fun, the others noticed school was over. Hinata was a bit worried that her father would be mad, while Shino, Choji, Kiba, and Shikamaru didn't really care about their own parents' anger. They had talked to Naruto and asked her and told her many things. Naruto just smiled when she answered her gotta answer. Kiba and Shino walked Hinata home, just in case anyone wanted to hurt her. They waved goodbye to Naruto, and Hinata did something she hadn't done in a long time. She rushed over the blonde girl and hugged her saying thank you. Naruto just smiled and patted her head. When they left, Naruto turned to Choji and Shikamaru, who was about to leave on their own too. Naruto then said, "Thanks for hanging out with me and Hinata-chan, you guys are really cool. I hope we can hang out again." Choji only smiled while Shikamaru said, "It was fun, not as fun as watching the clouds, but fun and a bit troublesome now. Me and Choji have to get going or otherwise my troublesome mother will yell at me today." Naruto laughed and said, "Okay, bye guys, see you when I see you." They nodded and walked off down the road. Naruto smiled to herself and said, "I better get going. I guess I made those guys wait long enough," and knowing Itausen he must be getting angry, and with that said Naruto started running to the tower. Gucci watched and smiled from inside the ramen bar, and his daughter stared at him a bit, trying to remember who her father was talking about earlier. As a matter of fact, that blonde reminded her of someone from a long time ago, only thing was she had red hair not blonde. Itachi glared at the council members who was bitching and whining about Naruto's rude behavior for leaving them like this. He rolled his eyes and swore that when Naruto returned, she was so going to get grounded for a month for leaving him and the Hokage alone with these fools. He and the Hokage stopped when they heard footsteps reaching the doorway. Suddenly the door opened slowly and standing there was Naruto, who grinned like the madman she was. She then said, "Sorry about that, I didn't feel like meeting you guys just yet." Everyone grew quiet as they stared at the blonde. Some covered their mouths at the Kushina look-alike. Someone then muttered under their breath, as she looked so much like Kushina. The others though stared wide-eyed at the girl who walked in. Naruto gave a cheery grin and said, "Hello, my name's Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze. Nice to meet you all." Tsume couldn't help herself. She jumped up and gave Naruto a huge hug. Naruto blinked a few moments before hearing the woman that looked a lot like the Kiba boy, "My god, you look just like your mother." Naruto blinked a few times before asking, "I do?" Tsume broke the hug a bit and nodded with a smile on her face, "Yes, you do. Only thing is you have your father's hair color and eyes." Naruto smiled softly and said thank you. Naruto stopped for a second before looking at the others. Before her eyes landed on her Jiji and her Itausen, she cringed at the glare they sent her for leaving earlier. She then heard someone get up and stare at her. She looked over and saw a man with wide eyes staring at her. Naruto looked at him and thought, is he Hinata-chan's dad? Maybe. She snapped out of her thoughts when he said, "It's great to see you alive, Namikaze Haim." Naruto glared at the name and shook her head, saying no. No Haim. Just call me Naruto. I may be their daughter, but I am not a princess, all because they were the most powerful people in Konoha, so please, just call me Naruto, nothing else, nothing more." Everyone blinked in surprised, but Hiashi nodded and said with a small smile, "I understand your mother almost said the same words when she came to Konoha, but hers was I'm not a princess because I was the heir to the Whirlpool country, just call me Kushina. Nothing else, nothing more. It seems you have gotten more than just your mother's looks." Naruto blinked before smiling a grin that everyone knew who she got from. Everyone who was there at the final battle between Minato and the Kyuubi had saw that grin that always said, "It's going to be alright. Everything is going to be just fine." Some cringed at the memory of Minato smiling before facing his death, but they looked to the smiling child who was as beautiful as her mother, but as reassuring as her father. Hiashi Hyuga, Shibi Abiram, Sumin Yazuka, Inoichi Yamanaka, Shikaku Nara, and Choza Akimichi knew just by looking at her, she was going to become someone quite strong, someone just like her mother and father. Tears started to swell up on some of their faces as they remembered their fallen comrades, their fallen friends, their fallen brother and sister. They may not have been blood related to Kushina and Minato, but they were still family in their hearts. Sum held back her tears and shook her head to get rid of them. She stopped when she looked down to a soft hand on her own hand. She looked and saw the hand belonged to the child she no longer held. She watched Naruto smile, a faint smile that meant it's okay, so don't worry. It was the same smile Kushina would show when she and Kushina were in the middle of a mission that nearly cost them their lives. Sum held back another set of tears. Some noticed a small smile and knew who she had gotten that one from. Some thought a perfect mix. She's a perfect mix of them both. Sum smiled this time and said, "Come on, let's sit down and you can tell us how you and your Anbu friend took with the outside world." Naruto nodded and smiled again. Naruto looked to her Jiji and her Itausen, who nodded softly. Naruto had just finished her story on how she had left Konoha, went through years of training, and how she and her Anbu friend had returned to Konoha. Of course she left a few things out, like who her Anbu friend was, how she found out about Kyuubi, where the secret entrance to Konoha was, and the kiss she and Haku shared. At the end she said, "And that's about it." She looked to the others who nodded and had listened to the story. As everyone calmed down, the Anbu walked to Naruto, as the Hokage said, "Now that her story is done, Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze, we must discuss some important things." Naruto nodded softly. The Hokage then said, "Naruto, normally a child your age has no say in this, and only the council has the right to decide, but since I believe in your judgment, I will let you will decide. Firstly, are you willing to become a Konohanin when the time comes?" Naruto turned to Itachi and nodded. She turned back and said, "Yes, I do want to become a Konoha ninja and protect the village like my parents had." The Hokage smiled, and a few others did too. Then the Hokage said, "Good then, starting next Monday, you will be entered into the Ninja Academy. Secondly, you will not have full access to your parents' money until you are 18, and until then you will survive on allowance from your parents' bank account given to you personally by me. But also when you become a ninja and climb the ranks, your allowance will shorten until I see that you can make enough money from the missions you will receive." Some didn't and did like that idea, while others glared a bit at the Hokage. They wanted that money in their hands themselves and knew that if they ever got the child to stay with them or under their care, then they would have a shot at getting to it. Naruto nodded and said, "I understand, Jiji." The Hokage nodded too and said, "Thirdly, this is important, Naruto-chan, who will you stay with? Normally I would allow myself to let you live with, but seeing as this is your choice, you can stay with anyone you like." Anyone from inside the council? Naruto stopped and looked around for a second. She noticed many had hopeful eyes, but a few had a gleam she didn't like, mostly from that man covered in bandages. He then said, "Hiruzen, surely you wouldn't allow a child so young decide on something this important, would you? I believe the best action is to have her under my care." And but before he could finish that, the Hokage shot a cold glare at him, knowing exactly what he was thinking. "Like hell I'm letting you even near Naruto-chan, Danzo. You even lay one hand on her, I'll kill you." But before he could say what he was thinking, everyone felt a powerful killing intent. Everyone turned to see the Anbu clutching his hands. Itachi glared at Danzo from under his cloak and said, "Danzo, I don't think you have any right to decide for her. Mainly because of your track record with the roots." Everyone tensed and remembered how the old Warhawk once was in control of the roots, but Hiruzen Sarutobi got rid of that, didn't he? Danzo twitched but nodded. When everyone turned back away, he sighed greatly and thought, "Good thing they left it at that, or otherwise they might would have gotten out of me that my roots are still around." He then glared at the Anbu and thought, but how does he know about them? No one outside of the council should know about it. Not even a high-ranking Anbu like himself should know. He then cursed to himself and was now trying to think of a better way to get the blonde girl within his roots branch and train her to be the greatest weapon for Konoha, and then when she was no longer needed for war, she would used as a breeding machine for the ultimate army. Everyone stopped thinking when they saw Naruto smile at them. She then said, "Jiji, as much as I would like to stay with you, or even get to know my mom and dad's friends, I think I'm going to stay with my Itausen." When everyone heard that last part, they did a triple take before Choza asked, "Oh, Itausen, Naruto blinked before giggling softly and nodding. She then said, "Oh, I forgot to tell you. Since my Anbu friend has been training me for a long time, he's taken care of me like I was his daughter. I know he isn't my real dad, but he's like a dad to me, so he's my Itausen." She smiled as Itachi looked to the Hokage. The old man smiled and said, "Very well, Anbu-san. Your mission was to protect Naruto and train her for 3 years. Your mission ended the moment she entered Konoha grounds, so I'll ask you this, Anbu-san, will you allow her to stay with you and be in your care until she is old enough, or if you die a untimely death? This will be your new mission if you accept it, Anbu-san." Itachi smiled under his cloak. He then said, "Have you forgotten what I said on the day we left Hokage-sama? I said I was going to protect her even if I died. What makes you think I'll abandon her now? If I'm willing to protect and die for her, if I'm willing to protect her even if I died, I will accept this mission to raise Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze until I either die or until she is ready to leave." Besides Itachi stopped and looked to the blonde who smiled a stunning smile. He smiled under his cloak again as he said, "All the time I spent with her, she has become my daughter, my own blood." The Hokage nodded and said, "So be it, Anbu-san is now in charge of Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze. Now there is a little matter of where they will stay. They could stay in the Naruto's old home, her parents' house, or with someone within another clan. Anbu-san normally used to sleep in the Anbu headquarters, but rules say no outsiders are allowed to stay within the headquarters without good reason, so where are you going to stay?" "Naruto, Anbu-san." When those that were disappointed that Naruto wasn't going to be in their charge heard this, most raised their hands in hopes. Naruto and Itachi turned to each other, they spoke to each other, and both nodded when they finished. Naruto turned back to the Hokage and said, "Actually Gigi, me and Itausen want an apartment. If we go back to my old place then it's going to take way too long for me to get to the academy as much as I want to. If we stay at my parents' old place, then there's going to way too much space, and we don't like big places. If it's going to be just us, we don't like the quietness. So we're going to wait until at least I'm 16, then we'll move in, and once again as much as I want to meet the people who were friends with my parents, I just can't. Only an apartment seems like a good choice for us. It's in town we want to be, and most of the apartments are near the academy and the Hokage Tower. Most of the stores and restaurants are near the center of town, which isn't far. We can easily find a 2-bedroom place that isn't too big or too small. And money won't a problem since you're giving me an allowance, and Itausen will go on high-paying missions if you need him to, so yeah, an apartment for me and my Itausen seems like a good choice." Everyone was disappointed but some nodded understanding. The Hokage nodded and said to them, "You both may wait for me at my office. I'll be there soon. I need to speak with the others." Both Naruto and Itachi nodded and walked out of the room at almost full speed. When the door closed he heard murmuring and some saying they didn't like the idea of her and an Anbu being left alone. When the talking died down, the Hokage said Naruto and her Anbu friend will look for a place tomorrow morning and they shall decide on what place they will live in. On Monday morning I will announce Kushina's and Minato's daughter has returned and she shall be in the academy later. I would like all of you not to speak any word of her arrival until then. Anyone caught saying anything about her in Konoha before I announce this, then I will personally deal with you." He said that with a glare that sent shivers down most of their spines. That's when Taiku said, "But Hokage-sama, you can't really allow such a small girl on her own with an Anbu who might be gone most of the time. She needs someone that's there for her. She needs to be with a real family, with a mom and everything." The Hokage gave a huff and said, "She's used to it, Taiku. When she was in hiding, I only got to visit her for lunch and sometimes dinner. Besides, I believe Snake loves her as much as a mother would, or at least as a big sister." Once he said that name everyone gasped in horror. Taiku almost yelled out, "Snake knows her." The Hokage nodded and said yes. "When I couldn't visit her or check up on her, I sent Snake." That's when Inoichi almost yelled in pure horror, "Hokage. You allowed that woman to check on her? If I was you I wouldn't even let them make eye contact." The Hokage only smiled slightly and said, Now Inoichi, Snake and her are best friends, you know. Snake would never hurt her. As a matter of fact she loves Naruto, even though she was the one that dyed Snake's hair pink." Soon the room went quiet before people held in laughter, and some cringed at that. Mostly they laughed because they did see the pink-haired woman walking around, and some winced because they remembered the attack they saw when someone laughed at her in the open. Right when Shibi was going to ask something, the door burst open and Naruto ran in holding a marker in her hand. Her face was a bit calm, and she blinked a few times before running to the Hokage and hiding behind him so no one could see her. When the Hokage was going to ask her what she was doing, Snake came into the room. Her mask was covered in doodles from a marker, and they could tell she was pissed off. Even if she wore the mask they could sense she was mad. "Hokage-sama. Where is that little brat?" The Hokage sighed before saying, Now Snake, it's not that bad. You'll be able to wash it off." If Snake wasn't wearing her mask, she would have been glaring daggers at the Hokage, but she said, "Oh, I'm not mad about that. I'm mad about the stuff she drew under my mask and on my face. I swear, Hokage-sama, never let Jiraiya near her again." Naruto popped out from behind the Hokage and said as she threw the marker, "Hey, it wasn't my fault. You were sleeping in Gigi's chair with a bottle of sake. And I tried to wake you, but all you did was moan and snore at me. you made a easy target. Snake was hit on the head by the marker and it threw her head back a bit, nothing was said for a while until Snake looked at her and said brat. She then ran at Naruto who wept and ran away from behind her Jiji. They both ran around the room at full speed and both yelling at each other before another figure rushed into the room. He reached out and took a hold of the back of Naruto's shirt and placed a hand in front of Snake's face, which made her stop as she tried to reach for the little girl. They stayed like that until Naruto looked back and stared at the person. She then smiled a bit and said oh hello Itachi. The Anbu glared under his hood before looking up to the others who seemed stunned for a moment. Itachi bowed softly and said sorry about that. Naruto walked into the office and saw Snake sleeping in your chair because I think she had found your hidden case of sake, Hokage-sama. And Naruto found a marker on the desk, so she decided that using it for her art would be the best way to get Snake up. The Hokage sighed but asked okay, but what was that thing Snake said about under her mask? Itachi stopped, and some could see a faint blush on his face. He then muttered out, don't ask. All anyone could see was a smirk on Naruto's face and a really angry and blushing Snake. Naruto was then able to get out of Itachi's hold and her feet hit the floor. She smirked and said what, you don't like my artwork Snake? Snake glared from under her mask and said brat. That isn't artwork. Naruto raised an eyebrow and said but Snake, it's just a guy and girl fu. She stopped when Snake lunged at her to shut her up. Naruto snickered and laughed as she ran out the room at top speed. Snake yelled out get back here. Before she too left the room in a run, Itachi shook his head. He turned back to the Hokage who seemed stunned and horrified at what she might have drew. He only said Hokage-sama, next time I see Jiraiya I am personally killing him. It's because of him she knows his version of the birds and the bees. If you wish to join, then by all means join. And with that he ran out of the room to catch his daughter. Everyone was stunned for a moment before noticing the high-raising killing intent around the Hokage who then yelled out in anger Jiraiya. Jiraiya sneezed a bit from his hiding spot and looked to the sky. He snickered with a perverted grin, then he thought it's been a while since I've seen Naruto-chan and Itachi. He then stopped as he remembered what happened last month. He shivered a bit and thought on second thought I think I'll wait for a while. Itachi might know by now that I told her about the birds and the bees, and knowing him, I don't think I'll be on the land of the living. If I go anywhere near him you know what, I think I'd wait until she's 12 before I see them again. He then stopped his thoughts when he saw a woman stepping out of the hot springs. He had a grin on his face and watched with glee. Monday had come and all of Konoha were standing in front of the Hokage who seemed pleased about something, but they could also sense some anger. The Hokage rose and spoke to everyone. Last week someone had returned from a long trip, someone I had been waiting for a long time. Everyone was silent, but soon heard the daughter of Kushina Uzumaki and Minato Namikaze has returned to Konoha. With that people gasped, or their eyes widened, when they registered what the Hokage said. Some cheered, while others seemed worried about the Kyuubi inside the child. They quieted down as he said, she will be living with a very trusted and skilled Anbu. I will not say his name due to reasons. The daughter of Kushina and Minato will be living within the village and will not be living within her father's and mother's house until she is 16. She will also not be allowed to have full access to her mother and father's money until she is 18. Many mumbled and some, mostly mothers, didn't like the idea of a child alone with an Anbu man. The Hokage then said now I know some of you are not happy with the idea of her being cared for by this Anbu, but this was her decision and I had allowed it. Now that is said, you are all dismissed. Also academy students please go straight to the academy. School has started. Some students groaned when they heard that. Unknowing to them, a blonde watched before she eyed some students walking to the school. She smiled and said time for the first day of school. Inside Iruka's classroom a few hours after the announcement, the classroom was in a buzz about the daughter of Kushina and Minato. Many girls said something about having her hang out with them and go shopping, while boys grinned and said something about her being loaded with cash. There were only a few that didn't say that. Minato was wondering a bit to herself at who the daughter of their greatest heroes were, but soon her mind went to the day she told her father about her new role model Naruto. He acted really strange and just told her to be a real friend to the girl. Kiba scoffed and said I bet you she's going to be all stuck up like the Uchiha that are like a total spoiled princess. He never liked rich people that much, they always acted like the world went around them only. Akamaru barked in agreement. Shino shook his head and said she might, but at the same time she might not. Kiba he only stared as Ino bonked Kiba on the head for insulting Sasuke. Toji munched on his chips and said what do you think Shikamaru? He then stopped eating and asked I was wondering something for a while, do you think we'll meet Naruto again? I really like her. Kiba's and Akamaru's ears perked up and Kiba said yeah. She was awesome. Shino nodded as Hinata fiddled with her fingers. Shikamaru laid back and said troublesome. Shino's right Kiba, she might or she might not, but I think she might not be. And to answer your question Choji I think we will. Ino glared and said why are you guys so intent on her? All weekend all I heard from you guys was Naruto this and Naruto that. She isn't a real girl, she acts like a boy. Kiba shot a glare and said shut it Ino. She's awesome. Sakura then yelled at Kiba hey dog breath leave Ino alone. Kiba sneered at her and was going to say something, but heard "Shut it, will you?" They all turned around and saw Sasuke by himself glaring at them. He then said, "I'm trying to think, and your arguing is distracting me." Ino and Sakura blushed and said, "Sorry Sasuke-kun, we didn't mean to." Both stopped and stared at each other for a moment. Just then the door opened, everyone stopped talking and turned to see their Hokage entering the room. Iruka blinked in surprise and he said, "Hokage-sama. What are you doing here?" The Hokage gave Iruka a soft smile and said, "I'm here to tell you, you have a new student Iruka. She's been in Konoha for a while, but today is the day she's entering the academy. She'll be joining your class for the next 2 years, seeing on how you have nothing against the child when you find out who she is." Iruka blinked and said with a smile, "Now oh, I see. Who is the new student Hokage-sama?" The Hokage only smiled a bit and turned back to the open door. He then said, "You can come in now." Everyone in the room watched with wonder and some got out of their chairs to watch. Suddenly they could hear some footsteps coming to the door and then in a few seconds a blonde walked into the room. Everyone gasped as they saw the blonde-haired and blue-eyed girl. Those that saw the girl take down the bullies last week and told those that weren't there what happened. They gulped as they realized she was going to be in their class from now on. Everyone was quiet and Naruto noticed all eyes were on her. Sure, she loved attention, but when the room was this quiet, she couldn't help but blush at being noticed by all. Thankfully a voice rang out to disturb the silence. "Naruto's in our class, that's so cool." Everyone turned to a grinning Kiba and a happy Akamaru who wagged his tail and barked. Naruto stared up and saw Kiba, with Akamaru, Shino, Hinata, Choji, and Shikamaru at the second to the top row. In front of them was Ino and Sakura who looked a little horrified, but behind the 5 kids she very much liked was Sasuke staring at her with a glare. Naruto waved to Kiba and the others. Kiba waved his arms and pointed to an empty seat next to Hinata, who smiled and fiddled with her fingers as she saw her new role model. She was about to run up and sit with them but heard Naruto, "Why don't you introduce yourself to them? Tell them your name and anything else you want to say." Naruto nodded and stood in front of the class. She bowed a bit and said with a grin, "Hello everyone. I'm 10 years old. I returned to Konoha a week ago after a 3-long-year training with my adoptive Itausen. I love ramen, my Itausen, my precious people, cooking, writing to my friend Haku-kun and his dad, pranking, toads, foxes, the color orange, training, and learning new justice. I hate people who hurt others for no reason, or if that reason is just plain stupid, fangirls, fanboys, people that hurt my precious people, Iro-sen spying on women, Bachan gambling away my money when she takes it from my wallet without asking, Shizune when she's pissed off, Itausen when he has a nightmare, animals that get hurt, and people that take the life of an innocent." Everyone rethought her words as she paused for a second. She then gave another smile as she said as she pumped her fist in the air, "My dream for the future is to become the greatest Hokage that ever lived. I wish to surpass the first, second, third, and my papa at being the Hokage." Everyone stopped and froze. They stared at her like she grew another head. One student then asked out, "What?" Naruto stopped and looked back to her Jiji who only smiled and Iruka who was stunned a little. Naruto turned back and said, "Oh, I forgot to tell you, my name is Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze, daughter of the 4th Hokage, Konoha's Yellow Flash, Minato Namikaze and Kushina Uzumaki, the Red Whirlpool of Konoha. And I'm happy to be here." With that said, Naruto did a little bow in some respect to her classmates. When she looked up, she saw many students stunned. Kiba fainted with Hinata as Akamaru barked in surprise. Shino raised eyebrow before nodding. Choji stopped munching his chips and dropped them to the ground. Shikamaru smirked a little as he already figured it out. Ino and Sakura's jaws hit the ground with disbelief, while Sasuke's face went from glare to surprise to glare again. Naruto only smiled at them with that grin of hers. 6 kids laughed hard, well 3 did, 1 held in a giggle, and the other 2 just stared at each other and sighed. Kiba laughed as they watched a teacher from the room down the hall walking around covered in feathers. Choji laughed harder as they saw the teacher fall to the ground because his foot was now stuck in a bucket of honey, and Naruto laughed more when she saw the teacher try to pick himself up, only to fall again. That poor teacher was their sub for now until Iruka gets back from the bathroom. Kiba had woken up from his faint before Hinata did, and when he saw Naruto sitting in the empty seat with them, he went into a grin and told her that he thought the 4th's daughter was going to a spoiled princess and a fangirl. When he said those words, Naruto yelled out that she hated spoiled princess and fangirls because they did nothing but complain and whine about stuff and they were never going to be anybody if they didn't grow up. That just made Kiba grin more. Kiba was sitting on one side of her and would glare at Sasuke who glared at her. Akamaru was now sitting in her lap, licking her hands or face a few times whenever she complimented him, always calling him a handsome dog and a great future fighter, but when he noticed some boys around the room staring at her, he would growl at them. Hinata woke up after and stared with awe and wonder at her new role model. She knew now why her father said those words to her. She would stare at the blonde as she would smile or make a joke. Hinata held in a giggle as she saw the prank. Kiba, Naruto, Choji, and Shikamaru made up right after Iruka left and had held in harder when it worked. Hinata started to worry as she noticed the glares from the girls in the room. Choji wiped tears from his eyes before offering some chips to his new blonde friend who happily took some. He only grinned as he watched Naruto munch away. He liked the girl, mostly because she didn't care about getting fat and she didn't care if he was fat or in case if want to go by what he says, big boned. Shino raised an eyebrow from under his glasses with no expression from his face, but if you could see under his jacket, you would see a smile had graced his lips. He shook his head softly before watching the others laugh at the poor teacher. Shikamaru sighed and muttered out a troublesome on his breath, but he did has an amused smile on his face as he placed his face on his arm he had on the table. His plan worked and watching the others laugh just made him smile a bit. He closed his eyes and glanced to the clock, knowing free time was coming sooner or later and he wanted to go out and watch the sky when it was time. Naruto only grinned the biggest grin she could place on her face. She munched on the chips she got from Choji and started telling them a bit about her travels, which they found cool to listen to. Naruto kept going on and on not caring about the glare she got from the Uchiha behind her or from Sakura and Ino. Sakura and Ino glared quietly at the blonde, they didn't like the fact that their Sasuke was staring at her, not at all. Sure they weren't like the other fangirls, but they didn't like the fact that their Sasuke-kun was watching her. Sasuke on the other hand glared as he heard the story from the blonde. He was mad, no he was beyond mad. Why wasn't he taken out of the village and trained? What made this girl so special to be trained by a Anbu and a bit by two legendary Sennin? Sure she was the fourth son the legendary Red Whirlpool's daughter, but he was a Uchiha darn it. He should have been trained, not this little girl. The teacher got back on his feet and was about to yell at the three laughing kids, but his voice never came out when the bell rang. The children cheered and ran out of the room to go play. Naruto and others raced out of the room at full speed trying to get away before they got in trouble. As they ran they went to a lone swing outside and some went to sit near the tree. Naruto went to the swing and sat down and faced her newfound friends. That's when Kiba asked, so Naruto, did you and your Anbu friend meet any strong people on your travels? Naruto nodded and said yeah, quite a few really. Like Zabu-sensei and Haku-kun. Zabu was the nickname Naruto used for Zabuza when she sometimes called him that. Kiba raised an eyebrow and asked Haku-kun. Naruto nodded and said yup, he's like a big brother to me and he can do cool things like make water into ice and he can hide in his ice mirrors, it's really cool. Everyone raised an eyebrow before going back to talking about other things. Naruto swung a little on the swing as Akamaru and Kiba played with each other. Choji went on munching on his chips as Shikamaru laid back and stared at the sky. Hinata shyly stared at Naruto before talking to Shino, who was in the tree looking for bugs to collect. Naruto only grinned more but stopped when she heard hey, you. New girl. They stopped and looked behind Naruto and saw Sasuke standing there with his arms crossed. Behind him was his fangirls, along with Sakura and Ino. Naruto blinked for a moment before asking, can I help you? Sasuke sent a glare and said with a growl in his voice, fight me. Kiba glared and said with anger in his own voice, hey. Sasuke, leave her alone, she's new here, so back off. Akamaru barked and his ears went back in anger. Shikamaru stared and sent a glare at Sasuke too, and so did Choji and Shino. Hinata stared nervously at Sasuke before looking at Naruto, who blinked a few times. Sasuke only scoffed at the dog lover and said, I don't care, I want to fight her. Naruto only glanced at Sasuke and got up saying, and why, may I ask, do you want to fight me, someone that hasn't done anything to you Uchiha team? When that last word left her mouth, Kiba and Akamaru barked with laughter. Hinata gasped at the word, Shino smirked from under his jacket, Shikamaru raised an eyebrow, and Choji laughed to himself. Sasuke glared at the blonde who smirked at him and his fangirls got mad. Ino then yelled out, hey. You have no right to call Sasuke-kun that. Sakura nodded with a glare and said yeah. You have no right. Many of his fangirls nodded and glared at the blonde. Naruto only stuck her tongue at them and said, look, I don't care if I have the right or not, he doesn't have the right to challenge me to fight when I didn't do anything to this brat. Again the fangirls glared and some wanted to go and punch the blonde in the face. Sasuke glared and sneered at her as he said, what, scared? I bet you I can kick your butt and you won't be able to land one hit on my face. Naruto only glared. After a while Sasuke turned around and said, I knew it, you're not strong at all, you're just a weak little girl that doesn't even deserve training from that Anbu. I bet you whined and complained to him when you didn't even want to pick a log or something. I bet the only reason he trained you was because you're the daughter of the fourth and Red Whirlpool. I bet he didn't want to at all. Or maybe he isn't strong at all. You're a waste of my time. Naruto sneered at him this time, but stopped and smiled a soft smile. She then said as she stood behind the Uchiha and tapped his shoulder, excuse me Uchiha-sen. Everyone stopped and looked at Naruto with wonder. Sasuke only smirked and looked back, but what he saw wasn't the blonde's face. Oh no, it was a fist. Sasuke was sent back and he landed into some of his fangirls. Naruto took a breath and yelled this out, you better watch what you say to someone Uchiha team, because I may be a girl, but that doesn't mean I'm weak, and to tell you the truth, I did complain, but that was when I couldn't train you ass. Oh and by the way, my name is Naruto, not new girl you moron. Sasuke blinked and touched his cheek. He then glared and was about ready to go and attack, but someone said, "Hey, what's going on here?" Everyone turned and saw Iruka standing there glaring at them. The fangirls leapt and ran away, leaving only Sasuke, Naruto, Kiba, Akamaru, Hinata, Shino, Choji, Ino, and Sakura. Naruto sent a glare to Sasuke but said, "Sorry about that, Iruka-sensei, but the Uchiha team here challenged me to a fight, and when I didn't want to, he called me weak, he even bad-mouthed my Itausen." Iruka raised an eyebrow but turned to the others. "Is this true?" Everyone nodded, but the only ones that didn't was Sasuke, Ino, and Sakura, who started saying it was Naruto's fault. Iruka decided to take the words of the new student because he knew how Sasuke liked to pick fights with new kid. "Sasuke, you'll be having 2 weeks of detention starting after school. Sakura and Ino for lying to me saying that it's Namikaze-san's fault. You two will be having 3 days of detention." Sasuke glared at Iruka while Sakura and Ino gasped, but they soon went to glare at Naruto for getting them in trouble. But then Iruka turned to Naruto saying, "And as for you, you'll be having a week of detention starting tomorrow, since you're new here." Kiba and the others frowned, and Kiba said, "Hey, why is Naruto getting trouble? She didn't do anything." Iruka shook his head and said she punched Sasuke. Kiba. "She could have come to me or the other teachers instead of punching Sasuke." Naruto shrugged and said, "It's okay you guys, I'm used to getting trouble. I'll be there tomorrow, Iruka-sensei." Iruka nodded and looked to Sasuke, Sakura and Ino and said, "Now you 3 run off and don't let me catch you doing this again." Sasuke glared again and nodded as he and the others walked away. Iruka sighed a little but turned back to see Naruto talking to the others. Hinata then said, "Hey, are you really okay?" And Naruto-chan. Naruto only nodded but heard, "This isn't fair, Sasuke's the one that started it." This came from Kiba, and Akamaru barked in agreement to his little master. Shino nodded and said, "It's true that Uchiha and his fangirls should be the only ones getting in trouble, not you. Troublesome first day here and you got in trouble. Why do I get the feeling you'll be getting detention a lot more than Kiba-kun?" Shikamaru said as he stood up and watched Naruto. Naruto only grinned, but Choji then said while munched slowly, "Yeah, Shika's right, I got that feeling too." Naruto then said as she placed her hands behind her head, "Well, let's just say, I'm a prankster, a true blue prankster, and pranksters get in trouble." Kiba and Choji laughed, Hinata giggled softly, and Shikamaru and Shino shook their heads. Iruka then said, "Excuse me, Namikaze," and everyone turned to Iruka. Iruka then said, "May I talk to you in my classroom for a second?" Naruto stared and nodded. As she started walking off, she turned around and said, "See you guys when the bell rings." They nodded and watched their new blonde friend walk off with their sensei. Naruto and Iruka entered the classroom and Iruka went to his desk, Naruto right behind him. When Iruka sat down in his chair, he said, "Now, Namikaze, I know why you wanted to punch Sasuke, but you can't solve your problems by punching them in the face." Naruto nodded, but said, "I know that, Iruka-sensei. You told me this already." Iruka only gave her a little smile, but said, "I know, I just want you to remember. Now there's another thing, Namikaze." Naruto titled her head a bit, but heard, "Even though you have your Itausen, you know he isn't your real father, right?" Naruto nodded a bit and said, "Yes, I know, though sometimes I feel like he's an older brother at times." Iruka only smiled a bit and said, "Look, I know how it feels to not have parents. I lost mine when I was about your age, so if you need anyone to talk to, just come by at any time and I'll listen, okay?" Naruto blinked and nodded. She then looked around and said, "You don't hate me, do you?" Iruka was surprised and said, "Why would I hate you, Namikaze-san?" Naruto only shook her head and said, "Nothing, it's just, when I was running out with the others, a few teachers looked at me like I should burn and die right where I stood. One even whispered that I was a demon." Iruka blinked before asking with some anger in his voice, "Who were they teachers, Namikaze-san?" Naruto shook her head and said, "It's nothing anymore, Iruka-sensei. I personally don't care what they say about me. My Itausen told me that I shouldn't care what others think of me." Iruka sighed a bit softly to himself. Naruto and him suddenly heard the bell ring and the children stopping their chattering and playing. Naruto grinned a bit before looking at Iruka saying, "Well, I guess class is going to start again, huh, Iruka-sensei?" Iruka only smiled a little and nodded. Naruto was going to head to her seat, but she stopped and looked at Iruka. She then said, "By the way, Iruka-sensei, please just call me Naruto. I don't like that Namikaze stuff, okay?" Iruka was a bit surprised at this. Normally high-ranking clan members were high and mighty about their last name, and he was forced to call a few by their last name. He only nodded a bit but stopped when he heard, "Oh, and by the way, Iruka-sensei, a word of warning for the future. I love pranking people, and everyone, and I mean everyone, is a target for my pranks. But because I like you, Iruka-sensei, I'll go easy on you." Iruka stared at smirking Naruto. This smirk was something that said, "I'm true to my world, you better believe it. I take no prisoners when it comes to pranking." Iruka wasn't sure if he should be thankful he was getting it easy or scared for those that were going to be her target. Naruto flopped on her couch as she got home. She gave a sigh into it before turning around to face the ceiling. Her first day of school went fine. Sure, punching her Itausen's little brother or having to scare the fangirls of Sasuke in class wasn't something she would have done of her first day, but it had to be done. After everyone got into the class when the bell rang, she was surrounded by fangirls who screeched at her for getting their Sasuke-kun in detention. Naruto had to cover her poor ears as they went on and on about it, and soon Naruto had enough of it. She had then leaked out a bit of her kai, complete with a glare that shamed any Uchiha's glare. She had learned this from Itachi. When everyone felt it, some cringed while others turned white as a sheet. When the room was quiet and the girls retreated to their seats, Naruto looked around and noticed that Kiba was shaking a bit, while Akamaru's ears were pulled back and his tail was between his legs. Shikamaru's eyes were wide, and he blinked a few times. Shino was silently watching, but he did shake a few times. Hinata was staring wide-eyed and openly shaked a lot. Not even her father could send that much killing intent. Choji had dropped his chips again and looked in disbelief at his friend, Ino, and Sakura looked pale and went to hide in their chairs. As for Sasuke, you could see he was a bit shaking and sweating, but it was then replaced by a glare and scowl at the girl. When the room was calm and no one said anything, Iruka had asked in a shaking voice, where did she learn that, and Naruto had told them that when she and her Itausen would be on the road, they would get ambushed by bandits and slave traders who thought they could either have fun with her before killing her or sell her for money, but not before using her for their own pleasures to see if she was any good. Many cringed and some looked horrified as she told them this like she was talking about the weather. She then said that whenever the morons mentioned having fun with her, that her Itausen would send out his killing intent, making them freeze and wet themselves. She then told them she wanted to learn it so whenever they were faced with those types of people again, she could prove to them that she wasn't a girl they could mess with. When Iruka nodded softly understanding, he couldn't help but feel a bit pity for the girl for having to almost get hurt like that. Soon after that everyone went back to what they were doing and things returned to normal. The only ones that didn't was Hinata, who kept asking her if she was alright. Naruto only nodded each time Hinata asked that, and the fact Kiba asked who those people were, so he and Akamaru can go beat them to a bloody pulp. Toji and Shikamaru would glance sadly at the girl, while Shino would calm himself down, but sometimes his bugs would act up in anger a bit. The rest of the day went good, but as Naruto and the others walked out of the school, Sasuke sent a glare at her as Ino and Sakura followed him so they could get detention. Naruto only shook her head. As they reached a certain point on the road they said goodbye to each other and walked different ways. Hinata lived near the middle of the upper town, Shikamaru, Kiba and Shino lived near the forest area, while Choji lived more close to the restaurant areas. Naruto walked with Choji because the apartments were close to the restaurant areas too. They talked before Naruto had to go one way and Choji had to go another. Both said goodbye and said they were going to see each other tomorrow. Naruto walked alone after that. She ignored the small amount of people who whispered at her and smiled cheery to those that waved to her, but rolled her eyes when they called her Namikaze-san. She was then able to reach her and Itachi's apartment they picked out the day after they came to Konoha and moved in yesterday. The building wasn't too big, but it wasn't too small. She walked up the stairs and searched her pockets. When she reached a room down the hall before finding a golden key, she opened the door and saw the place. It was a medium-sized place, one kitchen, one bath, a place to do laundry, 2 rooms, a hallway, a living room. It was just the place for 2 people to live in. Anyway, she kicked off her shoes and continued to stare at the ceiling as she laid on her back. She gave a sigh before hearing "You're home." She looked to her side and said Itachi coming out of the kitchen. He was wearing a black short-sleeved t-shirt with a fishnet shirt under it and black shinobi pants. He was munching away on a pokey stick. Naruto nodded at him and heard, "How was your first day of school?" Naruto rolled her eyes and sighed, irritated a bit. Itachi raised an eyebrow, but soon Naruto told him. At the end of the story, Itachi shook his head and muttered something about teaching his foolish little brother some manners. He then said to her, "Naruto, why can't you just not get in trouble on your first day of school?" Naruto only grinned a toothy smile and said, "Because Itausen, if I did that then I'm not really myself, now am I?" Itachi stared before shaking his head with a small smile on his lips. He only thought, Kushina-sensei, she gets more and more like you every day. When someone says time flies when you're having fun, they aren't kidding. But even though Naruto was having fun, maybe the best fun she had since she wasn't constantly on the move, she made every second count with her new friends. 2 years ago she came to Konoha and now she was 12, so she was ready to become a ninja. Naruto currently sat on top of the head of the 4th Hokage. She stared out into Konoha before looking to the sky and closing her eyes. She only said to the 4th, "Papa, today is the day I swear to you and Mama, I'll make you both proud." She opened her eyes and stood. The wind blew around her before blowing to the academy. She could see as students walked to the place. She took a breath and started walking off the mountain trail to the school. Naruto reached the school 10 minutes before the bell was going to ring. She watched as the other students walk inside the academy doors. Naruto touched her stomach because she felt sick. She was nervous. She wasn't going to deny that. The butterflies in her stomach were swirling fast. "Nervous, huh?" a voice behind her said. Naruto turned around fast and stared at a man with white hair, a headband over one of his eyes. He wore a mask over his face, so the only thing she could see was his hair and one of his eyes. He was Jounin of Konoha, and he held onto a familiar orange book. Naruto's nervousness disappeared into anger when she saw that book, the book she planned to destroy one day. She then looked at Kakashi and said with a caring smile, "Hey little Kakashi Ajusan." Kakashi's eye twitched at the name she called him and said with fake tears in a joking manner, "Naru-chan, why do you always call me uncle? Why not older brother? Minato-sensei saw me as his own son, why can't you see me as your older brother? Please, I don't want to be uncle. I'm too young to be called that old." Naruto only smirked at the one-eye user and said because Ajusan. She stopped for a moment before saying with a snicker, "You're far too old to be my older brother." With this Kakashi sighed in defeat, but he said one day you'll call me older brother Naru-chan, one day. Naruto giggled at him but poked him on the chest softly and said yeah, and one day pigs will fly and I'll be saying I'm in love with Sasuke Uchiha as I pluck the moon out of the sky for him. Kakashi just gave a unnoticed amused smile under his mask and said, "You're so cruel Naru-chan." Naruto this time laughed. When her laughter died down she stared at Kakashi who smiled at her, she closed her eyes and thought on how she met the man. It was 2 weeks after she returned to Konoha with her Atausen, she was swinging on the swing set by herself, Kiba had to stay home because him and Akamaru had gotten fleas from playing in an area they weren't supposed to, Choji was getting them lunch from the cafeteria at the academy, Shikamaru had fallen asleep in class and as the old saying goes, let sleeping dogs lie they had done so. Hinata was sick so she had to stay home, while Shino said he would be right back because he had just seen a rare insect fly by him, so he chased after it to the woods. So there she was, at the academy alone for the moment, she kept looking over her shoulder in case the Uchiha or his fangirls wanted to fight or annoy her, since she had punched the Uchiha on her first day, she had made enemies with 99% of the female population at the academy, but sadly, she also had admirers from more than half the boys at the academy, as she said before. She really disliked fangirls and fanboys. She gave a sigh before the wind blew at her, she stopped and suddenly looked up to the tree behind her, and her eyes widened as she saw a Jounin there holding a book in one hand, staring at her with one eye that could be seen. She stared at him for a moment before getting up from the swing set, she watched him as he watched her. And then, he suddenly jumped down and attacked her. Naruto was stunned at this and didn't make a move. She blinked a few times before doing something any girl would do if they were just suddenly attacked by an older man they did not know. She screamed the highest scream she had ever done and kicked him in a place where the sun don't shine. Shikamaru had woken up and looked around the room when he had heard the scream. Hinata stopped coughing and said as she laid in her bed, "And Naruto-chan." Kiba and Akamaru covered their ears and twitched in pain on the ground. Shino fell out of the tree he was on and hit the floor as the bug he was after flew away. Choji suddenly dropped the food he was holding and started crying over that fact. Naruto watched a white-haired man on the ground, looking like he wanted to cry. Naruto breathed in a few times and stepped a few steps back away from him. She then asked out, "Who the heck are you and why did you try to hug me, you weirdo?" She heard the man give out a weak chuckle and said while taking some breaths, "Why your mom was the same way when Minato-sensei tried to hug her, half the time, as she would kick him." Naruto blinked a few times before saying, "Wait, you knew my papa?" She saw the man look up and nod with an eye smile, she stared at him for a moment before saying, "Hey, wait, I know you. You're the boy that papa wrote about in his journal." Kakashi had it right. Kakashi nodded a bit on the ground before Naruto realized what she had done to the poor man. She ran over and said as she helped him up, "Oh, I'm sorry about that, it's just something my Atausen told me to do if I ever get hugged by a random person." Kakashi raised an eyebrow and asked out Atausen. Naruto nodded for a moment and said as Kakashi got on his feet, "Yeah, my Anbu protector the Hokage assigned to me when I went off for my training trip, he became my Atausen." Kakashi's eyes narrowed and he said, "I see," but before he could say anything Naruto then said to him, "I know he isn't my real father, it's just he treats me like I'm his daughter and sometimes little sister. No one, and I mean no one will ever replace my real papa or my real mama." Naruto smiled to Kakashi for a moment before he stared at her, he only shook his head and said, "You really are just like them." Naruto titled her head softly and said, "Who?" Kakashi smiled under his mask and said, "Your parents." It had turned out, Kakashi had been away on a mission when she had returned to Konoha. When he had heard that she had returned after he got back, he ran all the way to the Hokage and asked him where she was. When he told Kakashi, Kakashi had ran out at full speed to find her. The reason why Kakashi was so bent on seeing Minato's and Kushina's daughter was because he made a promise to Kushina. Days before Naruto's birth, Minato and Kushina had made plans to adopt Kakashi as their son. This both surprised and made him happy that they were planning to adopt him, and he couldn't wait to be a big brother too. But the day before Kyuubi attacked, Kushina had called Kakashi over to the house to talk to him. When he came over he noticed Kushina was worried and he didn't understand why. He was then told about Kyuubi coming to Konoha and was getting closer by every minute. It was then Kushina told him that if Minato went to fight Kyuubi, that he was planning to seal the Kyuubi away and that was going to kill him. Kakashi was worried more than ever, he didn't know what to do, but then he heard from her that if that happened to Minato, then she wanted Kakashi to raise Naruto and protect her from everything. She wanted Kakashi to watch over her and make sure she wasn't hurt. This confused Kakashi, but he agreed to it not knowing why she was asking him this. It wasn't until after the Kyuubi attack did he understand why she asked him. After Minato died, Kushina died too. It turns out Kushina had a 50% chance of being alive after her birth, and she knew that no doctors were going to be around during the Kyuubi attack, so she had died after giving birth to Naruto. Kakashi was torn in half when he heard not only was Minato dead but Kushina as well, but when he went to talk to the Hokage, he had overheard him talking about Kushina and Minato's baby to Jiraiya. When he heard this he went right into the room and demanded to know if she was alright. He demanded to see her. Of course the old Kage had to lie to the young boy telling him that she died along with Kushina. This crushed poor Kakashi. And for a long time, Kakashi drowned himself in missions after missions trying to forget his failures. He tried to forget that he failed his fallen teammate Obito, Rin, who too cried over the fact that Minato, Kushina, and the baby was dead, his sensei, and Kushina. So, years later, when he had found out Naruto was alive, he nearly had a heart attack. When he found this out he went back to the Hokage and demanded to know what the hell was going on. When the Hokage told him the whole truth, Kakashi couldn't help but get so pissed off that he had attacked the Hokage, and it had taken about 7 Anbu to pull him off, even though the Hokage couldn't blame Kakashi for that reaction. After that attack though, Kakashi demanded to go after Naruto and the Anbu that was assigned to her, so he could be the one to look after the young Uzumaki Namikaze, but sadly, the Hokage said no to that, and since then, him and the Kage had not been on good terms with each other. So that's what happened all those years ago. Kakashi had started to watch over the blonde as he promised Kushina. Sure, he still didn't trust the mysterious Anbu that came and went from Naruto's apartment at all times of the day, he just had learned to deal with it. As long as his little sister was safe, he was happy. But, of course things don't always turn out the way they were supposed to. Instead of calling Kakashi, Naisan, which is older brother, Naruto had started to call him Ajisan, which meant uncle or middle-aged gentleman, much to Kakashi's displeasure. Naruto just smiled to Kakashi and said, "I better get going, Kakashi Ajisan, don't want to be late, bye." And with that, Naruto walked away from the white-haired ninja and walked into the academy. Kakashi gave a upside-down U and thought, Minato Kushina, just look at your daughter. I bet both of you are very proud of her so far. God, she looks just like you, Kushina, but she has her father's eyes and hair color. She's going to be one heck of a ninja. Naruto walked into the academy doors and looked around. She had noticed some people stopped talking and looked at her. When she placed a few steps in the door, some boys said while blushing, "Hey, Namikaze-hime, come sit by me." And "Hi, Namikaze-sama, do you want to go out for lunch today?" And "Hello Namikaze-chan. Today is going to be awesome." Naruto waved hello to the boys before some girls said to her, "Hello Namikaze-sama, nice day today," and some who didn't like her said, "I bet you $10, she won't pass, and I don't understand why so many guys like her, she's not that special." She waved hello to those that were kind, but ignored those that talked behind her back. Naruto reached the near top row of the seats and saw her friend standing there. Hinata was giggling softly as Kiba and Akamaru fought over a sandwich. Choji was laughing at the two, while Shino just watched them. Ino was yelling at them to knock it off, or she was going to make sure they stopped, while Shikamaru laid back in his chair and watched them with an amused face. Ino Yamanaka had joined their group about a year ago. How it happened was both Ino and Sakura had stopped being friends because they both liked Sasuke. But after trying to win Sasuke's heart for almost a year, Ino learned that she had screwed up a good friendship over a boy that seemed like he didn't care for anyone but himself, so in hopes she tried to get Sakura back as her friend. Sadly though, Sakura just sneered at her and told her that she wasn't going to fall for Ino's tricks and told her that Sasuke was going to be hers one day. Upon hearing that, Ino was crushed that her once best friend no longer believed her and no longer was the same girl she was friends with. Her best friend Sakura had changed much over 1 year, and she knew Sakura was not going to believe her anytime soon. So, crushed, Ino ran out of the classroom that day and ran to the academy rooftop to cry over the fact she had lost her only friend, since all the girls that loved Sasuke didn't like her that much because she tried to blackmail or use them. When she thought for sure she was alone, she cried for a long time by herself. She didn't want anyone to see her cry. If they did, then they would have made fun of her. But soon she heard a sound, and when she looked back she saw something she never thought she would ever see. Standing right behind her, looking at her, was Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze, the same girl Ino tried to embarrass and blackmail half the time because she had beaten Sasuke and had gotten her in trouble the first day she was in Konoha. And before Ino could say anything, Naruto sat right next to her and looked up to the sky. Ino didn't say anything to Naruto, who didn't say anything to her. That was until she said 4 words to Ino, "Feeling better Yamanaka-chan." For some odd reason, when Ino had heard those words, she couldn't help but cry again, but this time a feeling came into her heart, a feeling she had forgotten about, a feeling that made her feel warm inside. After a long while of crying, Ino wiped her tears away and heard Naruto say, I know me and you didn't get off on the right foot a year ago, but if you ever need someone to talk to, or if you just want someone to cry to, I'll be right there, and don't worry, I swear I won't tell anyone you cried, and before Ino could answer, Naruto left. The next day though, Ino was waiting to get laughed at for crying or something, but it never came. 2 weeks went by and still nothing, so in wonder, Ino went up to Naruto and demanded to know why she hadn't told anyone that she saw her cry. The answer though, shocked Ino. Naruto had said to her, I swore to you I wouldn't tell anyone that you cried, Yamanaka-chan, and I always keep my word. Besides, I want to be your friend and friends don't tell each other's secrets unless it's okay. After that day, Ino had walked up to Naruto's, Kiba's, Shino's, Hinata's, Shikamaru's, and Choji's lunch table and asked if she could join them, shocking almost everyone at the academy. At first Kiba was going to tell her to get lost, but Naruto had stopped him and told her she could. Soon after that though, everyone warmed up to the young Yamanaka and soon enough she became part of their group of friends. Ino even got over her love for the Uchiha after watching how he acted to the other love-struck girls, including Sakura. She stopped putting her body on a diet and enjoyed some food from time to time, as long as she ate healthy and trained more. Ino had saw Naruto's and Kiba's brawl call training, she had seen Shino fight for real, she had even saw how Hinata, Shikamaru, and Choji trained, and what she saw made her realize that if she didn't train harder than ever before, she could never win anything, so for the past year, Ino had been training her hardest. Anyway, back to the story, Naruto smiled to her friends and said, hey guys, today is the big day. Everyone stopped and turned their head to the Uzumaki Namikas and smiled brightly. Hinata waved hello, Shino greeted Naruto with a nod, Kiba, with Akamaru smiled, Ino smiled to her, Choji waved his bag of chips, and Shikamaru gave a HN noise. Naruto just smiled to them and was about to take her seat next to Kiba and Hinata, but was stopped when she heard well. Looks like the queen of losers decided to grace her fools with her presence. Everyone stopped and looked back to a smirking Uchiha. Since the day she had punched the Uchiha, he had always called her a loser, a moron, an idiot, everything he could think of. And most of his fangirls had his back when he would try to challenge the Namikas, but when they would battle, Naruto always came out on top, although Sasuke had gotten close a few times. Naruto mostly won because the Uchiha got mad easily, and when he could try to hit her, he normally tired himself out. In the academy, everyone knew that Sasuke and Naruto were rivals. When one trained hard, the other trained harder. When one learned, the other had learned a new jutsu, the other forced themselves to learn a harder one. Naruto hated the Uchiha, and Sasuke hated the Uzumaki Namikas. Naruto rolled her eyes at the Uchiha and said, you know what, Captain Emo Duck Butt, why don't you leave me alone today? I want to spend the best day ever with my closest friends, and you're not even considered a living person in my book. Naruto hated him very much, he may be Hiratausen's little brother, but that still didn't excuse him for being rude to everyone. She tried, believe me, she tried to be friends with him, but when he told everyone he was going to one day kill a certain man, she couldn't help but try to protect Hiratausen. Sasuke glared at her for the nickname, but said, I don't even know why you try to be a ninja, your grades are low enough to be the dead last, if Kiba wasn't this earned a hey. From said dog boy. Naruto glared and held her arm out to stop Kiba from jumping Sasuke. She said, I may not be the best with book smarts, Uchiha, but at least I know I won't subject to this childish game. Sasuke smirked and turned around thinking he had won this match, but he stopped when he heard, oh, who am I kidding? And before the Uchiha could do anything, he was suddenly falling off the steps from a kick to the head. How dare she? Screamed inner Sakura as Sakura watched Sasuke fall down the stairs. Soon enough the girls that loved Sasuke were running to his side and glared at the Uzumaki Namikas. The other boys that didn't like the Uchiha started laughing, and Naruto's friends were laughing the most out of all of them. Well, Kiba, Choji, and Ino were. Hinata was looking a little worried but held in a giggle. Shino smirked under his cloak, and Shikamaru gave an amused smile. Naruto smirked before taking her seat next to Kiba and Hinata. Naruto watched as the Uchiha didn't move. Naruto just stuck her tongue out at the Uchiha with a smirk before turning to the others, saying, so, you guys ready to become ninjas today? Ino smiled and said, sure am, ever since I started training with you guys, I've been getting better. Kiba nodded and said, yeah, Mom and Hana are excited that we're taking the test. If I pass the exam, Mom said she's taking me and Akamaru out for dinner tonight. Choji nodded and said, my mom said the same thing. Shikamaru just nodded and said, my mom said if I pass, then she won't bug me for a month. Troublesome woman. Shino then said, my parents are waiting for me to come home after school to tell them I passed. Hinata smiled shyly and said, father said to try my best. Ever since Naruto had came to Konoha and befriended her friends, some had changed for the better. Kiba was same old, always being loud and crazy, both were best friends and prank masters. Ino stopped obsessing over Sasuke and was trying her hardest now to be a good Kunoichi, but everyone learned, mess with her friends, and she would make your life a living hell. Choji learned that if someone called him fat, it's better to be the bigger man and not say anything to those insults. Shino had learned to talk more. He also learned that not everyone was the way he thought they would be. He was scared of being rejected for the bugs inside him, but now he no longer worried about that. Shikamaru learned that not everything was troublesome, but he still said that even when it wasn't, the things that were really troublesome was what Naruto was part of, which was normally her pranks. As for Hinata, she had changed a bit, no longer was she shy to the point where she would faint. Sure, she still was shy, but only when she was around people she didn't know, but when she was with her friends, she could say what was on her mind. Sakura ran up to Naruto and yelled, "Hey Wid, did you kick Sasuke-kun down the stairs?" Naruto rolled her eyes at the pink-haired girl and said, "Because Sakura, he was acting like a ass to me again." Sakura cut Naruto off right there. "Sasuke-kun isn't an ass, take that back." Ino couldn't take Sakura's screaming and rose up from her seat, hitting the table with her hand. "Sakura, why can't you see that the Uchiha is nothing but a spoiled asshole that doesn't care about anyone but himself?" Sakura glared harshly at her ex-best friend and screamed out, "Ino. How can you say that about Sasuke-kun?" Ino then said, starting to get really ticked off, "Because he is Sakura. Why can't you see that?" Both ex-friends glared at each other, but before Sakura could respond, Iruka walked into the classroom saying, "Hi everyone, today is..." Iruka stopped when he noticed Sasuke on the floor and a footmark on the back of his head. He sighed before looking up to the top of the steps and seeing Sakura and Ino about ready to start a fight once again. Thinking fast, Iruka asked, "Oh, Sakura-san, can you do me a favor and take Sasuke-san to the nurse please?" When Sakura heard this, she completely forgot her almost fight with Ino and said with hearts in her eyes, "Of course Iruka-sensei. I'll take dear Sasuke-kun to the nurse." And in a flash she went from the top row to the bottom, took hold of Sasuke, knocked out body and ran out of the room, wanting to spend time with her Sasuke-kun. When she left, many girls glared and wanted to scream that Sakura got to take Sasuke to the nurse, while the other students sighed with relief. But Ino muttered under her breath as she sat back down, "Damn it, I really wanted to knock some sense into that girl." Naruto giggled and rolled her eyes at her friend before looking back to Iruka, wordlessly saying to him a thank you. Iruka just smiled at her. After an hour of lecture from Iruka, who was telling them that today was their last day as academy students, but now they were going to be true ninjas of Konoha, Sasuke and Sakura came back into the room. Sasuke had a huge bandage on his forehead and he seemed pissed off that Sakura wasn't letting go of his arm and that he was kicked down the stairs by his rival. Sakura on the other hand seemed to be in bliss as she hugged her Sasuke-kun. After a while, Iruka said as Mizuki entered the room, "Now, the exams will begin in a moment. The first part of the exam is transformation. I will be calling you in order by your last name, so will Shino Aburam come forward?" Shino nodded and looked to his friends, who gave him a nod and thumbs up to him. Soon enough the rest of the class was called on. In Naruto's group, it went from Shino Aburam to Choji Amachi, then to Hinata Hyuga to Kiba and Yuzuka to Shikamaru Nara. All that was left to be called in Naruto's group was herself and Ino. Sakura had already passed and she was waiting to see Sasuke turn. Iruka spoke up, "Sasuke Uchiha." He smirked coolly and rose from his seat, which was a row above Naruto's and her friends. Naruto smirked and muttered to them, "I bet I can make him lose that I'm cooler than all of you." Smirk again. Kiba grinned and said under his breath, "You're on. I bet $20 you can't." They watched Sasuke go past them, and right when he was about to pass Naruto, who was sitting near the edge of her table, she patted his back hard. Sasuke nearly fell from the steps, but he stopped himself and looked back with a glare. Naruto whistled and didn't look at him at all. Sasuke rolled his eyes and started to walk down the steps again with his "I'm cooler than all of you" smirk. Kiba spoke softly to his friend, "You lose." Naruto raised her hand up to stop his words and said, "Wait for it." When Sasuke reached Iruka and Mizuki, Iruka gave him the go-ahead and Sasuke nodded, knowing he was going to transform into the Hokage or something. Right when he did the hand signs he said, "Transform." And in a puff of smoke, Sasuke turned into an way older version of himself. Now some of you might be thinking, so he looks older and hotter. No, he didn't turn into himself in like 10 years, he turned into an old man. Some could say he looked older than the Hokage. He didn't have much hair, and whatever hair he had was white. He had many liver spots and his body was wrinkled. He was also shorter and a bit fatter than he was before, and he still wore his Uchiha clothes, so it wasn't the greatest sight to see. Sasuke heard chuckling from above and looked up to see Naruto rolling on the ground laughing hard. Kiba was howling with laughter, while Akamaru barked. Hinata couldn't help but giggle and hold laughter inside. Ino was banging her fist on the table, and her cheeks were red from her sinkers. Shino was biting his lip from busting up laughing, but everyone could see he was failing. Choji was doing the same thing as Ino, but was pointing at Sasuke. Shikamaru smirked and just muttered out, "A troublesome blonde and her seals." Sasuke didn't understand until he noticed the rest of the class. Boys were snickering and trying not to laugh while his fangirls looked horrified. Sasuke looked at Iruka, who was stunned, and Mizuki, who at first looked pissed off at the blonde but replaced it with a fake smile and laugh. Sasuke only asked out in a very old voice that sounded like it hadn't been used in a month, "What is everyone looking at?" Sasuke's eyes widened as he heard his voice and reached for his neck, saying, "My voice? Why is my voice like this?" More snickering and laughter could be heard from the people near the top row. Sasuke stopped and looked at his hands and realized they were wrinkled. He was going to say something, but heard from Naruto, who finally stopped her laughing and said as she sat back in her chair, "Take a good look at him, fangirls. Because this is what Sasuke team will look like in 50 to 60 years." She smiled as her elbow rested on the desk and her head rested on her hand. Shikamaru watched that smile and turned away, but his eyes drifted back to that stunning smile that brightened more when Kiba patted her back, as if saying good trick. Shikamaru watched her softly before he closed his eyes and said to himself, troublesome blonde. He wouldn't say it out loud, but she wasn't that troublesome at all in his book. She was different, strange, out of this world, cunning, smart in her own way, and beautiful. Suddenly the mood of laughter and snickering turned to anger, glaring, and disappointment. Sasuke's fangirls were ready to attack Naruto. Sasuke was going to demand her to turn him back to normal, but Iruka beat him to it. Naruto. What did you do to Sasuke? Naruto whistled for a moment, acting like she didn't do anything, but after a quick whack on the head from Ino, who seemed to think this joke went on enough, Naruto spoke, "Oh come on, it's just a seal that makes people who are about to transform into what I think their future self will look like." Naruto pulled up a small seal in her hand and showed it off. She grinned. Ever since their class had taken a quick lesson in seals one day, Naruto had fallen for them. She loved seals, and she bought books and scrolls. She borrowed seal scrolls from some clans, and she even found out from the third Hokage that her father was a seal master himself, so thanks to the third, she had full access to her father's seal scrolls. Sasuke glared as an old man and demanded to know, "When did you get a seal on me, you bitch?" Naruto only sighed and said as she got from her chair with a glare, "I put it on you when I patted your back, you bastard." Iruka glared at the language and said, "Naruto, Sasuke, stop with those words. Naruto, get down here and remove this seal, since I already know you only make seals that work for you and you alone." Naruto shrugged and walked down the steps, ignoring the glares from many females in the classroom, hard eyes from the boys, and the glare from old Sasuke. She walked right down and said, "Turn around, you bastard." Iruka stopped her. Naruto shut it up for a moment and said, "Just turn around." Sasuke growled and glared at her and did as he was told. On Sasuke's blue shirt, covering the Uchiha mark, was a seal. Naruto bit her thumb, causing it to bleed slowly. In a quick movement she whipped her thumb over the seal, then in a flash, the seal fell off and burned on the ground. Everyone watched as Sasuke re-aged back to normal in a poof of smoke. He turned around and glared at Naruto, but stopped when he noticed how close they were. Naruto was in a bit of stunned moment because Sasuke suddenly turned around and their faces stood almost less than 3 inches from each other. The class grew quiet as they saw Naruto and Sasuke stare at each other. Sasuke's eyes roamed slowly over her face, from her pink lips to her sharp bright blue eyes to her blonde hair that fell on her face, as if it was hugging her softly. Naruto stared at Sasuke for a moment before noticing he was getting a little bit too close. Her eyes narrowed and said, "Hey, bastard, what the hell is the matter with you?" Sasuke snapped out of his daze and saw the angry look in the blonde's eyes. He scoffed and turned away, saying dope. Naruto wanted to kick him at that moment, but heard Iruka say, "Naruto, please go back to your seat." "Sasuke, can you please redo the transformation now that Naruto removed the seal?" Iruka was uneasy. He didn't like the way Sasuke had stared at his little sister. During the 2 years Naruto was at the school, Iruka couldn't help but make a close connection to the young Uzumaki Namikas. Both understood how it felt not to have parents, even though Naruto had her Atausen. Both saw the world the same way. Both dreamed for a better future for not only themselves but for others. He couldn't help but think of Naruto as his little sister. Mizuki made a face and thought, that demon is trying to charm the Uchiha. No way in hell I'm letting the last Uchiha get tainted by this monster. Mizuki was one of the very few in the village that still believed that the Naruto they saw now was the Kyuubi. They also believed that the real daughter of Minato Namikas and Kushina Uzumaki was being controlled by the Kyuubi, and if they killed the body Kyuubi was using, the real daughter would return. Sasuke watched from the corner of his eyes as Naruto went back to her seat. His mind wandered for a moment, thinking, strange, what the hell was that all about? And why the hell haven't I noticed her eyes were that shade of blue before, or how tan her skin is, or how her lips are pink and look soft? I wonder how they really feel. Sasuke stopped his thoughts and nearly yelled in panic in his mind, what the hell? Where the fuck did that come from? DCH, it's not like I care about that dope. All she has ever done was make my life hell since she's got here, but after I pass and become a ninja, I won't have to deal with her or any other female. Shikamaru didn't like it, not at all. He didn't like the fact that the Uchiha, the one his blonde friend had tormented a few seconds ago, was nearly 3 inches away from each other. He didn't know why, but he didn't like the look in the Uchiha's eyes when he was looking at Naruto's face. Shikamaru couldn't help but glare a bit at the Uchiha. Soon after Sasuke was done and transformed into Mizuki, it was then Naruto's and Ino's. Both passed with ease. Soon enough Iruka and Mizuki told them to go outside for the fighting exam part of the test, which made Naruto and Kiba hyped up. When Iruka told them the matchup, some were far too funny. Ino and Sakura were fighting first. Sakura had started gloating to Ino that she was going to win, and Sasuke and her were going to marry. During that time, though Ino was able to kick Sakura so hard she landed outside of the fighting field, making Ino the winner. Shino and Kiba were going to fight, but Kiba forfeited because he had battled Shino once before, and it wasn't the nicest thing on the planet for him and Akamaru. The reason why it was funny because of the face Kiba made as Akamaru whimpered. Hinata had to fight with Shikamaru. It was good battle, both were smart and quick with their movements, but in the end, Shikamaru had won the battle by outwitting Hinata sadly. Joji fought against a student who normally tormented the poor boy before Naruto had came to Konoha. When he thought he could rile up Choji like those years ago, the boy was shocked to see Choji ignoring him and asking him, "Sorry, you say something." It got a few laughs from Naruto and the others because they were proud of their big bone boy, but when he said something about how Naruto shouldn't be friends with him, that Naruto needed to be friends with people who wouldn't eat her out of house and home, that's when Choji got mad. Sad to say, the boy was nearly crushed by a very angry Choji. Soon enough the last match was to be held, the battle between Sasuke and Naruto, much to Naruto's displeasure. The match was close though, Sasuke had even got a few hits on Naruto, which surprised a lot of the classmates, but Naruto knew it was only a matter of time before he started to catch up to her level. But in the end, Sasuke overused his chakra and lost the match. Now that the fighting exam was over, the written exam was up next for them, much to Naruto's hate. It was now the time for the ending part of the exam, the clone exam. Naruto waited for her turn and sat on the swing she always sat on. She was once again nervous. She knew she didn't do too well on the written exam and knew that if she didn't pass this one, she couldn't become a ninja. And to make matters worse, she knew she was bad at making normal clones, but she did have an ace up her sleeve. She and her friends who went already and now had their headbands watched as Sasuke entered the exam room. Suddenly Naruto heard from Ino, "So, now that you guys passed, I guess it's going to be a while until we can see each other, huh?" Hinata looked unsure and asked out, "What do you mean, Ino-chan?" Ino then said, "My dad told me that when the academy students becomes genins, only 3 of them are placed on the same team together, so in other words, we might be in the same team, but we might not be." "Hey yeah, my dad told me the same thing," Choji said. Well, Kiba almost yelled in protest, "What, but they can't separate us? We're friends for goodness sake." Shikamaru sighed and said, "Sorry Kiba, but that's how Konoha's system works." Kiba pouted and folded his arms, saying, "That's not far, splitting us all up like this. How long do you think it's going to be before we can see each other again?" Ino shrugged and said, "Don't know, could be days, months, heck a year or 2, maybe soon." They got quiet and no one dared to say anything. That was until Naruto said, "Since we're not sure if we'll ever see each other again after tomorrow, how about you guys come over to my place for a celebration after the exam? My Tausen said he has a gift for me and wants my friends to be there, that and I want to tell you guys something really important." Everyone who was her friend looked at her for a moment and agreed. Naruto just grinned at them and thought, "They're right, it might be a long while before we can see each other, and I know for sure I'm not going to be placed on their teams." Ino, Choji, and Shikamaru remake the famous Ino Shikacho, and knowing Jiji, he wants to see if they can pull off the teamwork their dads did. Then there's Shino, Biba, and Hinata. Put these guys together, add a sensei that makes them work together, and you have yourself a good tracking team, maybe one of the best thanks to Shino's bugs, Kiba and Akamaru's smelling senses, and Hinata-chan's Byakugan. Naruto watched as Sasuke came back out of the room with his headband and seemed to be having his "I'm better than all of you" face again. She sighed as she saw Sakura and few other girls fawn over him, and she couldn't help but think, please, 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 if there is a god out there, please don't let me be placed with Sasuke or Sakura. Naruto snapped out of her begging when she heard from Iruka, "Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze. You're next." She nodded and looked back to her friends who gave her the thumbs up and cheered her on. "Okay Naruto, I need you to make at least 1 shadow close," Iruka said with an unsure smile. He knew how the poor girl failed at normal clones. Naruto stood in front of Mizuki and Iruka nervously for a bit before she said, Iruka-sensei, I can't do normal clones." Mizuki was going to say something, but Iruka spoke, "I know, but try Naruto. Maybe you'll get it this time." Naruto shook her head and said, "I can't, I have way too much chakra, and whenever I try to make a normal clone it is normally dead." But Mizuki then said, a plan forming in his mind, "Hey Iruka, can't we just pass her? I mean, she is trying her hardest to pass." But Mizuki was cut short when Naruto said, "But I have another idea, Iruka-sensei, Mizuki-sensei." Iruka and Mizuki looked at Naruto, who then said, 2 months ago when we started working on the clones, my Tausen noticed I was really bad at normal clones, so he went to check the forbidden scroll. He looked in it and saw a certain type of clones that need a lot of chakra to be created, and he showed me it. I believe it's called Shadow Clone Justu. It was something my real dad made up when he was creating New Justice." Both teachers were surprised, but Mizuki said, demanding to know how on earth did he get a hold of the forbidden scroll. Naruto smiled to Mizuki and said, "I gave him access to it. Since most of the justice in the forbidden scroll belong to my father, I have access to them because I'm his only living heir." Only me and Gigi have access to the scroll at all times, and if someone wants to see my dad's forbidden justice, they have to get my permission first and then the Hokage's permission. Mizuki cursed under his breath, realizing that his plans were blown out the window, but soon stopped when he made a new plan. Why trick the Uzumaki Namikaze into stealing the scroll when she could just get it for him? Mizuki stopped thinking when Iruka asked alright, let's see it, then Naruto. Naruto nodded and closed her eyes. She placed her hands in front of her and did the hand signs. When she got to the end of it she said shadow clone just to. And then a poof of smoke surrounded her. I hope Naruto-chan passes, Hinata said as she and the others sat around the tree. Kiba nodded and said yeah, and if she doesn't then we can go talk to the Hokage. He'll help us. Some smiled at the idea, but suddenly heard from Shikamaru. Did any of you notice the way the Uchiha has been hanging around the door? Everyone stopped and looked at the Nara before looking at the exam door. Sasuke was standing there, ignoring the love-struck looks of his fans. His back was at the wall, and he seemed to be waiting. Ino's eyes narrowed at Sasuke, and Shino asked what is he doing? Choji watched and said it looks like he's waiting. Ino looked at Shikamaru and asked out, for what? No one said anything for a moment, and Shikamaru's eyes narrowed when he noticed Sasuke's face perk up when the door opened, revealing a smiling Naruto waving her headband in the air, yelling out I passed alright. Her friends noticed the Uchiha was watching her before he turned away, and none of them liked that look he gave to their blonde friend. Naruto waited for her friends outside of the academy gates. Each one went to their own parents to ask if they could come over to Naruto's place for a little while. She sighed a little before looking to the sky, wondering how on earth was she going to tell them the truth that the beast known as Kyuubi was inside her, sealed away by her own dad. She wanted to tell them a long time ago when she first became friends with them, but was scared that they would hate or be scared of her for it, so for about 2 years she had hidden it from them. She looked down to the ground and looked at her orange pants, at least they'll know now. She stopped thinking when she noticed some parents and grandparents were staring at her. Some had smiles as they spoke about how she's going to be a great ninja like her parents, and very few glared. She watched them before noticing someone was behind her. She looked back and saw Mizuki standing there. She never liked Mizuki, something about the way he smiled and talked to her always made her nervous. She watched Mizuki before he smiled and said good work Namikaze-san, you really surprised me. And Iruka Toti making that shadow clone Naruto eyed him warily and said thank you Mizuki-sensei. Naruto turned back to the few adults that glared at her. Mizuki noticed her eyes roll in annoyance, and he smirked. He suddenly said Naruto, do you want to know why some people hate you? When Mizuki said that Naruto looked up wide-eyed. Naruto was quiet and this made her friends nervous. They stared at each other as Naruto walked down the road lost in thought and ignoring the hellos and waves by villagers. Pretty soon Naruto and friends found themselves at the stairway that led up to her and Haratausen's apartment. Hey, Naruto, are you okay? Kiba asked worried about his blonde-haired friend. Akamaru let a little whine as if asking her too. Naruto stopped and looked back them, and for a moment she had a look on her face, as if she had forgotten who they were, but suddenly that look changed, and she smiled a grin at them and said oh, yeah, just thinking Kiba. About what? Ino couldn't help but ask. Naruto shook her head and said nothing important, now come on guys, Atausen is waiting for us. Naruto's friends had met her at Tausen a few times, but not a lot. He would come and go from the apartment at all hours of the day. They had never seen his real face, because he would hide it under a mask or his cloak. They hardly heard him talk, and when he did it was normally only to Naruto. Even though he was Naruto's Atausen, her friends couldn't help but feel a bit intimidated by him. They nodded a bit and all of them headed up the steps. Naruto opened the door with her keys, and as she pushed it open, she smiled at them and led them to the living room. She reached for a light switch in the dark room, she turned it on, and the others' eyes widened. The room was full of balloons, streamers, and a banner above saying congratulations everyone. Starting tomorrow, we are ninjas. They could see the table in the kitchen had snacks and other stuff on it, and by the smell of it, something good was cooking in the kitchen. Naruto grinned at her friends and said awesome huh? I worked on it yesterday and Atausen finished the rest while I was at the academy. Before one of them could answer, the noise of someone opening and closing the oven was heard, and coming out of the kitchen with a tray of cookies was none other than Naruto's Atausen. He had on black shinobi pants, with a black muscle shirt, his hair was in a ponytail, and he had a weasel mask on his face. He stared at them before placing the cookies on the table to let them cool. Hi Atausen. Naruto happily chirped to her father, and she ran to give him a hug. He was gone most of the day yesterday when she started on the party, and didn't come back until she had crashed on the couch late at night. When Itachi had walked in and saw what his daughter was planning on doing, he woke her up and told her to go to her room and go to bed. She was going to say no, and that she needed to finish, but Itachi told her he would finish the rest while she was at the academy. Naruto hugged Itachi before he said I see that school is over, how did it go? Naruto grinned before digging into her orange jumpsuit pocket and taking out a headband. She then said sure did, but I'm going to wear it tomorrow. That's when my ninja career begins. He nodded from behind his mask and said to the others in the room, it's good to see you all here. I'm going to be leaving soon and I just wanted to give Naruto her gift. Everyone nodded and sat in the front on the couch as Itachi disappeared into his room. Naruto's friends looked at each other, still uneased about their friend's Itausen. As they waited, some of them started to play a guessing game that was only played for a few seconds before Itachi returned with something wrapped in a cloth, something big. They stared at the cloth before Itachi walked to Naruto. He held it out and said here. Naruto blinked a few times before taking the cloth off carefully and each one of her friends getting up and walking close to see the gift. Right when Naruto unwrapped it, her eyes widened as she stared at it. In her hands was a blade in a black and blue sheathed. She took hold of the blade and unsheathed it. It was a steel blade, it shined in the light and had whirlpool designs embedded into the blade. The handle of the blade was red and dark ocean blue. It was crafted with care by what she could see. It belonged to your mother when she was your age, Itachi spoke from behind his mask. Naruto and her friends looked at him wide-eyed as he said, she spoke very often when she was found out she was pregnant with you, on how when you become a true ninja, she will pass this blade, the blade of the Uzumaki clan of the long-gone whirlpool country down to you. Just like when she wielded this blade, the Kiryu blade, all those years ago. Naruto's breath hitched as she heard the name of the blade. She then said, why you mean to tell me that this blade, the blade known as the legendary swirling current, belonged to my mother, the same blade that Zabu-sensei said he would move 2 mountains and destroy 5 villages just to see that Kiryu blade. She looked down to the blade as Itachi nodded. She stared at it before holding it up in the light to have a closer look at it. She could hear her friends gasping at the sight of the blade before Naruto heard, your mother wanted you to have this, Naruto. She entrusted it to me in case anything were to happen to her or to your father. Naruto kept staring at the blade in wonder, but smiled at it. She couldn't help but feel mesmerized by the sword. Shikamaru slightly watched the blonde-haired girl and watched her eyes dazzle with light while staring at the blade with wonder. His own eyes softened at the beautiful light that shined in hers. Naruto's face broke out into a smile and small little tears streamed down her face at the thought of her mother holding this blade just like she was now. Her eyes softened and her smile broke softly. Soon enough a pain entered her heart. God, how she wished she got to know her mother for herself instead of hearing what other people say about her. How she wished she got to see her face when she received this blade. She heard her friends grow quiet and watch her with concern. She put her arm down and put the blade back into the sheath, and with a click of the blade she carefully put it next to her. She stared up to Itachi and hugged him. Itachi was a little stunned at what Naruto did, but suddenly heard from her as she cried softly, I wish mama was here, as she would have been happy to give me it. Itachi nodded and hugged his daughter back, understanding what she was wishing for. It was hard for a girl to lose both of her parents, but it was harder for her to have only see them once, and it was the day she was born when she saw them last. It was hard for her to see other kids with at least one blood parent or at least with someone who was in fact related to them. Naruto's friends just watched and didn't say anything as Naruto silently cried. None of them knew the pain of losing both parents in any family. Sure, some of them did lose parents, but they at least had another parent still. After a while Naruto broke out of the hug and wiped her tears away saying, see, come on, it's a party, let's have fun, and when she said that everyone nodded. Itachi had left as soon as the party began. He believed in his daughter that the party was going to stay small and not get wild. So he left. He told the others he had important business to discuss with the Hokage, but before he left, Naruto slipped him a piece of paper that was important. Naruto sat down in her chair and munched on some chips as she watched Ino and Kiba get into another yelling match about their pets. It turns out Ino was a cat person when they came over to her house one day after school. When Akamaru saw the cat, he flipped and chased the poor Abyssinian cat named Shiraha around the house for 2 hours. It took all of them to tackle Akamaru down and get poor Shiraha off of the curtain. After that, Ino and Kiba didn't like each other pets at all. So anyway, both Kiba and Ino were in a yelling match about whose pet was better, Akamaru or Shiraha. Naruto just laughed as they went on and on about it before noticing a hand trying to reach for her chips. She smirked and said, Choji, you take, I break. Choji laughed uneasily before removing his hand from the chips and Naruto saying, kidding dude, here. She then handed him some chips and he smiled at her. Naruto looked around and saw Shino talking to Hinata, who both watched Ino and Kiba fight while Shikamaru was sleeping on the couch, but you could see Akamaru sleeping on the lazy boy chest. She chuckled before her eyes landed on the sword she had placed on the table not too far from her. She smiled at the blade before jumping up to turn on some music. What was a party without music, huh? She turned on the radio she and Itachi had bought years ago, and the music played. Soon enough the room had music playing. Ino and Kiba stopped their yelling and heard the music play. Both couldn't help but dance and laugh to it because it was their favorite song. Choji snuck back into the kitchen for some more food. Hinata giggled as Shino sighed a little. Shikamaru looked up and around to see what people were doing. Naruto grinned before running over to Shikamaru saying, "Come on Shika, it's a party not school, so get up and dance." Shikamaru grumbled at her, but suddenly was pulled up by his hand. He looked up to see who it was as Akamaru jumped off his chest to the floor. He stared into the bright blue eyes of one of his closet friends and saw her smile saying, "Come on and dance with me." Soon enough he was pulled off the couch and onto his feet. She dragged the lazy boy to the middle of the room and soon enough started to dance with him. Shikamaru stood there for a moment before smiling softly to the grinning girl and joining in on the dance. Shikamaru took her hand and twisted her around before the dance went on with more music. Both danced around each other's feet and both smiled at each other, unaware of the eyes that watched them. Ino had on a crazy look on her face, which meant she was scheming in the future. Kiba raised an eyebrow and a smirk appeared on his face. Hinata was giggling more in her hands. Shino just stood there thinking, and Choji, who returned from the kitchen, smiled at his two closet friends that were dancing. Near the end of the song, Shikamaru took her hand once again and twisted her around. Naruto laughed before she faced Shikamaru. Her long hair that she no longer kept in a ponytail hugged her face. Her face was a little bit of cross between slender and chibi. Her eyes were a bit shaper, and her body was still that golden tan. Shikamaru and Naruto stared at each other for a long time as the song faded and no words were heard from a moment. Shikamaru snapped himself out of his thoughts when he started to hear Kiba, Ino, and Choji catcalling at them, while Hinata giggled again with a blush on her face. Shino shook his head at the others that were catcalling Naruto and Shikamaru. Shikamaru blinked a few times not understanding before he looked at Naruto who was staring at the others because she too didn't know what were they doing. He did understand when he noticed his hand was still in hers and he blushed a little as he noticed it. In a flash he let go. Naruto looked at him when he did and wondered why he let go. Shikamaru used his hand to scratch the side of his face to make her believe he had an itch and she did believe him. Naruto just went back to grinning and talking to her friends. It was a good party all in all. Naruto was now talking to Ino and Hinata. Ino then said, "Naruto-chan, why don't you let me and Hinata-chan take you out shopping? That jumpsuit you're wearing is not flattering with your body. Plus it screams out I'm over here, come kill me." To the other ninjas, even though Ino was more interested with being a kunoichi, there was moments when her girly side entered in and it was mostly the times when she tried to get Naruto out of the orange and blue jumpsuit. Naruto blushed and dug herself into her jacket like a turtle in its shell. She hated it when Ino would say stuff like that about her body. She, Ino, and Hinata went out to the bathhouse a few days ago and while there Ino and Naruto envied Hinata's body because she was big for her age. But after the envy vanished and after Hinata fainted from embarrassment, Ino had noticed how perfect Naruto's body was, not too big but not too small, just the right height and perfectly curved. Soon after that she made it her mission to get Naruto out of that orange and blue puffy jumpsuit and into some real clothes. Naruto did sighed and knew her friend was right. She then said, now remembering what she did the day before, "Actually Ino, I have a new outfit, it's my kunoichi outfit. But I'm not going to show you it today, tomorrow, okay Ino?" And Hinata was a bit stunned that their friend who loved the jumpsuit she wore was in fact willing to let it go and wear a different outfit instead. Meanwhile, with the boys, Kiba nudged Shikamaru and said with a wink, "So, are you and Naruto secretly seeing each other?" Shikamaru blushed but he stopped and turned to Kiba saying, "Don't joke about that Kiba. Naruto and I are just friends, besides it's troublesome having a girlfriend." Kiba rolled his eyes, but Shino said as he raised an eyebrow at him, "Really? And that dance with her was just you both being friendly?" Shikamaru glared a bit at the bug user and said, "Yes, and besides, she was the one that pulled me up to dance. I was happily sleeping before she came in and dragged me away." Choji snickered at him and said, "Okay, then why were you holding her hand when the song ended, huh?" Shikamaru's head snapped at his best friend and he said with a blush, "I wanted to end the dance by spinning her, okay, and I forgot I had my hand on hers when it ended, okay." The three boys looked at each other and said with a smirk on their faces, "Right." Shikamaru face palmed himself and just groaned at the snickering friends around him. Even though he did that, his eyes traveled a bit to see Naruto laughing with Ino and Hinata, and as he watched this, his eyes softened before he muttered out, "Troublesome." Naruto's eyes landed on the clock and noticed it was nearing the time she had to leave and give Mizuki the forbidden scroll. Her eyes narrowed as she remembered what he asked her to do. "Now, Namikaze-san, if you wish to know why some of the villagers don't like you, I need you to give me the forbidden scroll," Mizuki said as he stared down at Naruto, who seemed stunned for a moment. Inside Naruto's mind it raged, "What? Why the hell is Mizuki asking me to give him the scroll? Something isn't right, he isn't right, but still if he's willing to tell me that secret, what's stopping him from telling anyone else? I better tell it Tausen and Jiji. I think we have a traitor in Konoha, but first." Naruto snapped out of her thoughts and smiled fakely at him saying, "Okay Mizuki-sensei, I'll get that scroll for you." Mizuki smirked a bit but said, "Alright, now. I want you to meet me at the forest entrance near the Hokage mountains, you know, the one with that shrine." Naruto nodded. Mizuki's smirk deepened. "Good, meet me there at 9 tonight, okay?" Another nod. "Good." See you later Namikaze and Mizuki then turned around and walked away from Naruto who sat on the swing watching him. Her eyes narrowed as she thought Mizuki you're planning something aren't you? Naruto snapped out of her memories when she heard Choji say hey guys I got to get going soon. She looked at Choji as the others agreed, saying they needed to go home soon and celebrate with their family for passing the genin exams. Naruto nodded before saying alright, but before you all leave, I need to tell you something. Everyone in the room stopped themselves and stared at the Uzumaki Namikaze. She was looking down to her feet and by the looks of it, she didn't look happy. Naruto-chan is something the matter? Hinata asked out not sure why her role model and friend didn't look happy. Soon enough the others went by Naruto's side to see if she was okay or not. Naruto looked at them and said follow me, and before anyone could answer they followed her to the middle of the room. Naruto then said sit down please I'll be right back everyone did as they were told. They had learned very quickly that when Naruto orders things like this in that voice, it was important. Naruto watched them all sit down and she walked into the halls to her room. She walked into her room which had scrolls, books, ramen cups and other things around, just a normal room for a tomboy girl. She walked and searched her room until she found a red scroll which her dad, her real dad, wrote to her in a small old wooden carved box she placed under her bed. She stared at the scroll before getting up and softly walked back into the front room where her friends were waiting. When she returned she didn't say anything, all she did was silently walk over and sat in front of her friends as they made a circle. Everyone was nervous, they never saw their friend like this before, quiet and calm, almost like something bad was coming their way. Naruto sat there before opening the scroll. She opened it all the way and sat it down in front of her and on the floor, she spoke and said this was a letter my dad wanted me to read. Everyone knew that when Naruto said dad and not a Tausen, she was talking about a real father, the fourth Hokage, Minato Namikaze. Everyone leaned in wanting to know what the Hokage wrote to his only daughter. Naruto's eyes watched them and she looked down saying Minato's words that were written on the paper. My dearest daughter. Hello, my little girl, it's me, your daddy those were the first words I said to you when you came into this world. By now you might be wondering who I am. Well I'm your father, Minato Namikaze, as for your mother, her name is Kushina Uzumaki. My darling little one, I am sorry for what I must do tonight on the day of your birth, but I must do this, I know you might never forgive me for this, but it's the only way to not only protect this village, but to protect you too. I can hear its roar even now, getting closer. Your mother smiled when she held you in her arms tonight, your mother smiled the brightest smile I had ever seen on her beautiful face, as you giggled and reached for her. She looked at me and said you were the most perfect and the most beautiful baby she had ever seen, and that one day, you were going to be the amazing and strongest child in the future she would ever know. What I am about to do will kill me, and not only that, but sadly your mother had died after giving birth to you, the stress was too much for her to bear. But don't you dare think that you killed her, in fact, she already knew she was going to die after giving birth to you, yet she still went through it because she believed I would be at your side while you grew up, but now that will not be. What I am about to do tonight will be a burden and a gift for you my little Naruto, and I know only you would understand why I chose you. If you can never forgive me for what I will do I understand, but please my little one, remember this. I love you, your mother loves you, we love you with our hearts, and nothing will change that. No matter what we will keep loving you even if you hate us, we will always love our baby girl. Don't let anyone tell you different, don't let them say we don't love you, and don't let them say you're not loved. Because you are loved. I must go now, the Kyuubi is coming closer and I can hear the people screaming. Goodbye and good luck my little fish cake, mine and your mother's spirits will always watch over you. From your father, Minato Namikaze. Naruto looked up to her friends' confused faces, they didn't understand, what was he talking about? Why was he apologizing to Naruto? And what was that about Kyuubi? Naruto then spoke up you guys all know I was born on October 10th right everyone nodded, of course they knew she was born that day, it was the same day the Kyuubi was defeated, but the Kyuubi was defeated at night wasn't it? As a matter of fact, most if not all people of Konoha celebrated the Kyuubi festival at night more than in the morning. Naruto looked at them and said well, to let you know I was born at nighttime, during the Kyuubi attack. Some eyes widened a little at the thought of having a child being born during that terrible night, but still what did all these have to do with Naruto, her father, and the Kyuubi? Naruto took a breath and unzipped her jacket, she pulled the jacket off and said while fixing her black t-shirt she always wore under the jumpsuit, my dad couldn't kill Kyuubi, he may have been the Hokage, but not even he can defeat the Kyuubi, so he did the next best thing, he did what he was best at. Everyone's eyes widened at this, the fourth Hokage, Minato Namikaze, Konoha's yellow flash, couldn't defeat the Kyuubi, but everyone said he did. He sealed it away in a newborn baby that night, Naruto said as she lifted her shirt up above her stomach, but too far up, she forced some chakra into her stomach, and soon enough the seal appeared, she looked at their shocked faces, and said softly me he sealed the Kyuubi no Kitsune, away into me that night. The seal glowed bright when it appeared, but now it began to fade back into like it wasn't there anymore. Naruto sighed to herself and put her shirt down before reaching for the scroll and closing it. Naruto didn't look at them, but said with her head down, "That's what I wanted you to know. I didn't tell you before because I thought you would hate me like some of the older villagers did. I'm sorry I never told you, and I understand if you don't want to be my friends anymore." Suddenly though, before Naruto could get up and lock herself in her room, she somehow found herself on her back and being hugged by Hinata. Naruto blinked a few times not understanding, but she soon heard crying sounds from Hinata. Naruto blinked again confused at why her best friend was acting like that. "I am sorry Naruto-chan, I'm so sorry." Hinata cried out, she then said, "Why you have such a burden, I should have noticed it, I'm a terrible friend." Naruto blinked again before asking Hinata-chan. "What are you talking about?" Hinata's head shot up and she said with tears, I should have noticed it, I should have noticed the way they looked at you and why you hated your birthday at times. You carry the greatest burden ever and yet I never noticed it. I'm sorry." Naruto watched Hinata but smiled softly and patted the girl on the head, saying, "Hinata-chan, please don't cry, I don't like it when you cry." Hinata didn't stop, but she cried harder, believing she was a terrible friend for never figuring out she was the container of the Kyuubi no Kitsune. "Hinata-chan, please stop. It's not your fault, okay? It's mine. I should have told you a long time ago. I was just scared that I wouldn't have you as a friend anymore if I did." Tell Hinata let go slowly and stared disbelieving at her friend and role model. She shook her head and said, "And Naruto-chan, I would never stop being your friend no matter what." But before she could continue with her words, someone suddenly said, "You're idiot Naruto." Everyone's head snapped to Ino, who was standing up now and looking a bit angry. Naruto's eyes softened thinking her other friend hated her now. But then, Ino said, "If you think I'm going to stop being friends with you for something you had no control over, something that just happened when you were born, then you have another thing coming, because guess what?" Ino smiled next and said, "You're my friend Naruto, and no matter what, you'll always be my friend. Kyuubi or no Kyuubi, nothing will change the way I see you." Naruto looked up at Ino and watched that smile before a smile of her own appeared. Soon enough the room exploded with the same type of answers from her friends. Biba bonked her on the head, saying that she should have told him sooner. Shino said that he didn't care about the Kyuubi because he understood how it was to be the host of something that made people fear him. Choji told her that no matter what she'll always be Naruto in his eyes, and as for Shikamaru, he muttered a troublesome and said something that she will always be just that, troublesome. But on the inside, Shikamaru was cursing to himself for not figuring out why Naruto was hated by